You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
Une simple goutte de ce liquide Quatre hommes vont jouer leur vie au volant de ces camions. Et de la peur. Mario. Chou. Monsieur Jo. Et si les flics veulent me mettre ça sur le dos?
Mon ami Jacques Becker a retracé dans tous les détails une histoire vraie. La mienne. Ça s'est passé en 1947. À la prison de la Santé.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week, we're talking even more procedural films about men escaping hell, I guess. So just join that sleaze.
That's right. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover as well. Patreon subscribers also get an honor shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we've been doing for many years at this point. There's like 140 plus bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series where we talk about new release genre films, which I'm pretty sure we're getting pretty close to 50 of at this point.
Yeah.
So there's like 200 Patreon episodes for anyone interested, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And just to preface this, because this is where we give those patrons their shout outs. This is going to be one of the longest shout out sections we've ever had to do, so I apologize in advance. As people maybe heard on last week's show, Jamie has been on tour with his band for a month, and he's finally wrapped it up, but we took a month off from the show and recorded a bunch of episodes in advance, so you were getting Sleazoids episodes every week during that time. So if anyone was like, hey, why did I sign up for the Patreon in July and not get a shout out? Prepare yourselves. You're all getting shout outs right now.
It's all happening right now.
So I'm going to try and do this actually pretty quickly today. We have Riley James, who signed up for $5 a month. We had Taylor Burns. We had Aaron Crabtree. We had Kurtz. We had Sam Sal. We had Charlie Rohr. We had John R. Rogers. We had Lashlyn Saunders. We had Tony Wolf. We had Nadia, Matthew Bolter, who signed up for an entire year of the podcast in advance. Once again, there's an annual tier for the show. If you like it enough and you want a little bit of a discounted rate monthly, you can subscribe for 12 months all at once. So thanks to Matthew for doing that. We had Noah Blankspoor sign up at $5 a month. Steven Strother, Sam DeChristopher, Lobster 2000, Justin Halley, Benjamin Hurst. We had Alheen, Maxie, Sam Schick, Dylan Usher, who signed up for $10 a month and will be joining us for the monthly virtual screenings we try to do at the last Thursday of any given month. So thanks to Dylan for that. We had Nate Joseph sign up, Jane Griffin, D. Ushru, Joe the Lion, Lawson,
Nice.
Sumler, Aaron Stagoff, Aiden, Dylan Thompson, Interrobang. That sounds ominous, actually. Samuel Langstone, Luke Gillespie, and believe it or not, we just hit August. Max, Chris, Niels, Tom, John, Dan. Wow, lots of first names going on this one. Good job, guys. Jackson Littlewood, that was easy to read out. Giant African Bullfrog. Riley Beller, Ethan Sorrell, T, Jeremy, Alice, Riley, White, Glenn Youngkin did 9/11. I didn't know that, but I'm glad. I'm glad that I know that. Also signed up for a year of the show, so that is like an approved for a year of the show. Josh approves that message.
I guess it's right. Yeah.
Benjamin Tran, Ben, Andrew also signed up for an entire year of the show. Mike Riley, Ethan Johnson, Cars, Sonia Desse, Branson Reese, friend of the pod, an entire year of the show. Branson, you could have just asked me, bro, but I appreciate the support anyway.
Thanks,
Amelia Becking, Punches, 2104, Wilt Garner, how is this still going? Ben Badger, Jasper Beagle, New Metal Jacket. That's good, actually.
Yeah.
I like that one. Michael Keane, Daniel Cabo, Nick Ballas, Justin Shen, Claudius Kessobomer, Harley Richard, Daniel O'Connell. We're getting so close. I'm so sorry. Jan Toddy, who signed up for an entire year of the show. LP, who signed up for an entire year of the show. Wow, lots of annual subscribers over the last month. And Antonio Sosa. And last but not least, Kua. Oh, and also Nathan F. There's one more who snuck in there as well. So,
wow.
Oh my God. Thanks so much. I mean, obviously we took a month off, so that's also, part of what's going into all of this. But that was all. We also had an exceptional month. So thanks so much to all of the new patrons. Hope you're all enjoying those bonus episodes. We really appreciate that support.
Yeah, thank you very much. I did want to say just a personal thank you to the audience because we had a goal in mind for this year, and I think it was about half of the year in, we pretty much surpassed it. So I'm just kind of overwhelmed by the support.
We kind of blew past it, and we have 6 months before we wanted to actually make it. So yeah, we're pretty happy.
Yeah, so just thank you to everybody. It's been awesome.
Yeah, I'm never going band for band with you guys. Never going to do that.
But that's the one plug for the week, as always. And the other plug for the week is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you guys are listening on either one of those platforms, make sure to give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners, and we appreciate that support as well. And then the very last plug for the week is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything that you can think of. And you freaks thought of some weird shit. You guys have bought pillows, you guys have bought notebooks, you bought hoodies, you just bought posters for your dorms or apartments or whatever. That link is in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com for anyone who's interested in that. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and also joining me, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks, the main feed listeners, would have heard from us, when we would have actually had the wonderful comedian and cartoonist Branson Reese, who just subscribed to the show like a god, to whip out the giant oversized mallets and invisible ink and sexy femme fatale drawings and break down the barrier between animation and live action with us, where we talked about two particularly kind of horny and violent and slapstick, sort of animated and live action films. Very famously, Robert Zemeckis' toon noir technical achievement of merging the golden age of animation and the history of Hollywood noir films in Who Framed Roger Rabbit from 1988, starring another god, Bob Hoskins, which was a childhood classic for me. I was very excited that we got to finally cover on the show, because man, that movie gets funnier and darker as I've aged into actually understanding that it's referencing movies like Chinatown and also the racist history of animation, which I would have known nothing about the first time that I watched it. I would have been like, the rabbit does a funny face. Yeah,
it's kind of unbelievable how they just kind of get right to the threshold of what would probably exceed what you can put in a children's film, but they just do it with such creativity. It's really, really an amazing film, and I love just
they tried really hard to call that acid the final solution, and they were like, no, you can't do that.
that would have been wild, but they still do manage to bring in a lot of really crazy violence, and they cartoon it up with a little bit of lack of blood, but even the infamous dip that looks like blood by the end of it and stuff. It's just they have a lot of really creative and cool effects that make it kind of an adult film, oddly enough.
Yeah, and we paired that with Branson with Ralph Bakshi's very blatant and flawed and compromised knockoff of Roger Rabbit, Cool World from 1992 with Brad Pitt and Kim Basinger and Gabrielle Byrne, which was we talked about at length with Branson, who really does love the film and have affection for the film, but is very open about the fact that it is basically like half R-rated, horny, psychedelic Bakshi of the kind of stuff that you would maybe want to see from him.
Yeah.
And then maybe, and basically half, if not more than half, just awful PG studio commercial notes trying to turn Bakshi into something that, you know, would suit a studio kids film in a way that just makes a really confusing and kind of idiotic movie, especially by the finale. But there's definitely still some enjoyable stuff in it.
Yeah, it's one of those unfortunate films that it's a studio hired someone with a very unique vision and then didn't allow them to do that. It's just a very strange thing when that happens, and unfortunately, that's kind of what happens with Cool World. It is interesting, though, to watch Brad Pitt do this very strange kind of pseudo-detective performance, and then when Kim Basinger turns into actual Kim Basinger and she's still trying to do the animated thing a little bit, it's bizarre to watch. So there's some entertainment to be had, but yeah, it definitely falls short.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard that episode, that was over on the main feed 2 weeks ago. Go back and go check it out. But last week over on the Patreon feed exclusively, we did a bit of a left turn, and we wanted to, you know, to get a little bit spooky with it. We wanted to talk some two very cheap, independently made early 60s black and white psychological horror films, both that kind of had like Carnival Beach movie aesthetics a little bit to them and some sort of expressionist style and atmosphere. We did Curtis Harrington's Night Tide from 1961, which is this very cat people inspired sort of like horror romance noir fable about Dennis Hopper as a horny sailor who falls in love with what he thinks might be a man-eating mermaid. It is actually like, you know, very, very, very good cheap movie. And we paired it with Herc Harvey's Carnival of Souls from 1962, which has very much gained a sort of like cult following over the last, you know, essentially 60 years. But like it was made by a guy, it was the only feature film made by a guy who made like industrial educational videos for schools and shit like that. And he had $30,000 and a couple friends, and he went and made a movie in Utah about a woman who survives a car accident and basically finds herself walking in a form of like zombie-like purgatory that's like part George Romero, a little David Lynch maybe took some inspiration from it, and very, very haunting and great movie.
Yeah, and specifically, it's the location work in that. When they finally go to the, I can't remember what they call it. It's like a giant, it's not a theater. It's kind of like a arena of some kind. I can't remember what they call it, but it's one of the most like beautifully haunting abandoned places that I've seen on film, and they utilize it so well in that movie. So yeah, it's a gorgeous movie.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard that episode, that was over last week exclusively over on the Patreon. But setting us in for some sort of like moody black and white kind of 60s era. Moving on to this week, we have a very special guest returning who hasn't been on the show actually in a number of years, but we've been meaning to get him back on. He is the host of the Those Good Old Fashioned Values and Get Cynical podcasts, both podcasts that I've guested on before. Jamie and I both actually once talking about Ted 2, but also talking about the James Woods movie Cop, and also against my will talking about the Nostalgia Critics video review for Steven Spielberg's AI, which was just horrendous and horrifying. Maybe the worst thing anyone's ever asked me to watch for a podcast.
Oh, I bet. Oh my god!
Proud to have that honor.
but that guest is
waterboarding.
Spencer Ryder. Spencer, how are you doing?
Hey, I am great. It's good to finally be back on. Like we said before, it has been 3 years, which is really, really upsetting. And just, you know, it's great to feel old.
How you pitched this episode to us right after we finished recording, it does feel like it took us a little bit of a while to find a space to kind of plug this one in. Because last time we had him on, we were talking about John Woo's Bullet in the Head and Wong Kar-wai's Fallen Angels, which are still two of my just favorite movies, and I think it was a really good episode of the show. So we're very happy to have you back, and also to be I should have known after we finished that episode that whatever you were going to pitch us was going to be very good movies. So what two films have you brought with you that you pitched us 3 years ago, and you and I was impressed you stuck to it. There are a lot of people who pitch us stuff, and then when the episode actually comes around, they're like, it's been like 2 years. I'm interested in other movies now. I've seen other things, but you stuck to this pairing, so this must be an important one for you.
I actually will correct you. I think right when the episode was done, I pitched The Driver by the Walter Hill movie.
Oh, did you? I could have sworn it was this because I've had this one in the Excel document for a long, long time. But maybe you did adjust it.
I changed it like a few months after because I saw you guys were doing an episode on The Driver, which, would go well with both of these, I think. So, it's fine. But today we are talking about The Wages of Fear, the TROU movie that most of your audience probably knows was later remade or readapted, since it's from a book, into late William Friedkin's Sorcerer.
Oh, yeah.
And we are also talking about, I don't really speak French, and this is not a hard word, but it's still going to fuck me up somehow. Le TROU, or the hole, which is what I will be calling it from now on to avoid embarrassing myself.
Me too.
It is a film by Jacques Becker, a French filmmaker who, as Josh pointed out on Letterboxd, was an assistant to Jean Renoir and had just a huge career, and this was his very, very last film. He fucking died, I think, before the film even premiered at Cannes. So
he did, yeah.
It was it's his very, very last. These are two of my absolute favorite movies. I think they're both in my top 10 of all time. So I am more than happy to talk about these two films. And I paired them both together because they are part of a personal favorite micro genre of mine, which I like to call the process thriller. Mm-hmm. And that is a thriller movie or some type of action or thriller movie where the process of undertaking a task becomes the tension itself. Like where, in traditional Hitchcock fashion, for example, and that's not to besmirch Hitchcock, he's also one of the greats, but, you'd have like a concept and then there'd be like a lot of set pieces strung along and there'd be all these like little details that trickle in, and the act of doing something would usually just be like one set piece. Like Notorious has the key set piece or something. Mm-hmm. Where these are movies that are almost entirely based around accomplishing one task. Other later examples, Thief, the Michael Mann movie, I think is a good example.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of procedurals of the Zodiac variety could qualify. They could be considered a cousin to it, but these are the high water marks of the genre where they have this complete purity about them, where they just came up with an idea of a stressful task or a difficult task to complete, and the entire movie is just that task. And while there's stuff like in the subtext and there's stuff on the sidelines, like the red meat of what we're going to be talking about is just the very slow and arduous process of taking nitroglycerin across South America or breaking out of a French prison.
Hell yeah. Damn. Well, that was a very good introduction, because I usually have to throw my own thing in here, but I was like, I would have thrown in the term white knuckle in there. That's basically it. That's probably the only other thing I would have added.
Yeah, no.
Because these are very, very great, impeccably crafted and authentic too. I wanted to add too, where like both of them actually do come from writers who did actually experience these, if not these exact events, these places, and knew people who went through these exact experiences. And in the case of The Hole, we'll talk about it at length probably. One of the main actors in the film is actually the guy who did the attempted prison break. So it's these are very, very authentic and, to the minute detail, methodical, and, very much just observing tasks being done. So I'm very excited to jump into these. And that being said, I think we are going to jump into it here. Let's kick things off with The Wages of Fear.
Get going.
All right, we are talking The Wages of Fear, the 1953 French thriller written and directed by Henry Georges Clouzot. starring legendary French actor Yves Montand from Z, Le Cercle Rouge, Grand Prix, which is I think actually the last time we talked about him, and based on the 1950 French novel The Salary Affair by Georges Arnaud, which was also adapted, as Spencer mentioned, stateside in 1977 by director William Friedkin, who recently passed away. So I felt like worth kind of like, giving him a little bit of the shout out here, because I know that we talked about a lot when we did our Sorcerer episode that like there's a long heated debate between the Wages of Fear heads and the Sorcerer heads on like everyone agrees the material is amazing. And it's kind of a hard to fuck up material, honestly, on some level, but they are. And as far as someone remaking a film that had already been adapted or whatever, they are very stylistically different. So it was, that's what I kind of like to see in a remake. I hate when it's like someone's just trying to like shot for shot do it again or something like that.
Oh yeah, it's probably the best, top 5 best high concepts in Hollywood history. I mean, this one was outside of Hollywood, but just in movie history generally, it's one of the best just unfuck-upable ideas. And honestly, I wish more directors had taken a crack at this material and put their own gloss on it. Like, I'd love to see a Michael Mann.
Let's line it up.
Yeah. I'd love to see a Michael Mann Wages of Fear. I'd love to see...
Who would make the first bad Wages of Fear?
I want to see Guy Ritchie's Wages of Fear.
Who's bad enough to, do it?
Guillermo del Toro.
Michael Bay's would be like a convoy, so we could have at least 48 explode before the 2 get like to the end.
Yeah, the Guillermo del Toro's, there would be like, I think like Michael Shannon would like start shooting at them while they're driving around.
Yes. Well, I'm assuming throughout we'll probably bring up Friedkin a couple times just to talk about some of the differences, because actually one really big one that watching Wages of Fear for the first time for this, I actually was quite surprised at a change that he made, other than maybe he thought that maybe he couldn't top it. So he's like, I got to do something else on that specific task. But this is directed by Henry Georges Clouzot, he's a very well-known French director behind, this is probably maybe the film that he's the most famous for outside of, I guess, like Diabolique, which is a movie whose rights he actually famously stole from Hitchcock, who wanted to make it. He also did the film La Vérité, and we've actually talked about him once before for his film Le Corbeau from 1943. So if anyone wants to go back to that episode, we kind of went through the history of him a little bit, where he's kind of a prickly guy. He was described as someone who even people who liked working with him kind of found him disagreeable and kind of short-tempered and kind of just like a negative dude, which is partially what people kind of psychoanalyze as kind of drew him to very dark, kind of corrupt subject matter. He had a very bleak sensibility to him, and he had a pretty crazy life that included at one point being bedridden for 5 years in a sanatorium due to tuberculosis.
Wow.
So he had a pretty rough go of things, and he was unable to escape France when the Germans eventually obviously occupied France, and he ended up working for a production company called Continental, which is actually where he would make Corbeau, and subsequently be charged with collaborating with the Nazis and actually banned from filmmaking for life for a while. They ended up sort of repealing that down to, I think, like a 2-year sentence. But yeah, Le Corbeau partially is a film that actually got banned in France because it was this very bitter, grim, sort of allegorical fable of a town that is rocked by these like vicious poison pen letter smear campaigns to various sort of like upstanding members of the community, everything from like affairs to unlawful abortions, and he kind of depicted the hysteria and hypocrisy that kind of came from that situation, and definitely in a very expressionist style. When we did that episode, we found a lot of interviews with him where he was just talking so much about like Fritz Lang, for example, like M from 1931, the mob frenzy, the kids playing, the reading of notes. It's like all over Le Corbeau, as a little bit of shadow of a doubt as well. But yeah, highly controversial film because it was technically made with Nazi money during the French occupation, and it was taken as a story designed to vilify the French for being corrupt, and I don't think came out until basically the 1960s for a lot of people. And with distance, people kind of realized that it wasn't really an anti-informant story, which is I think what people kind of took it as, and it became more of a sort of anti-occupation depiction of being, the sort of paranoid effect of becoming a fearful and kind of insular community, and the idea of kind of being watched and stuff like that. But one of the things I felt watching that film that definitely carries over to Wages of Fear, and why I kind of wanted to bring it up, is his very expert feel for tense and misanthropic atmosphere kind of simultaneously. He uses just about almost every visual tool he can in Le Corbeau, from the shadowy lighting to these very deliberate framing and these canted angles, this Gothic architecture. I remember one particularly beautiful sequence in that was the funeral procession that eventually became this claustrophobic manhunt as the secret starts to spread through a literal crowd of people in real time, and you can almost feel the whispering and the hostility growing and everything like that. And it was one of those things where I kind of went, man, I eventually got to see what that guy did with Sorcerer, because I just happened to have watched them in the reverse order.
Yeah, me too.
I know it's probably not how I should have done it, but it was one of those things where I was like, man, I bet you that guy stylistically probably made a cool version too, and I can confirm I really loved this film.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I mean, the style is unbelievable. It was really cool, honestly, to watch these individual suspense sequences that I really already know I love in Sorcerer, and just see them how they were originally done and how there's differences. And there's honestly quite a few differences in this. They kind of take the same beats, just in the sense of how the information is drawn out, and even the pacing is very similar. But when they go into the individual procedural stuff with the tasks that they do at each section, there are some pretty major differences in both the style and how they go about them.
The big set pieces in this are very slowed down. I mean, obviously the most striking difference is that there's no music, where Friedkin, he got Tangerine Dream. He very wisely
has one of the most iconic 70s soundtracks, basically.
Yeah. No, he blasted it everywhere. And in this one, there's almost no music whatsoever during the entire film. Just lots of silence, lots of creaking boards and rumbling engines, and all of them, the focus is on just much more minute problems. The biggest difference is the rotten bridge. In the Friedkin version, it's a giant fucking bridge in the rain.
Yeah,
the whole bridge is rocking, and it's it looks like it's happening in the bowels of hell. Yeah. And in this
there's a literal storm happening. I remember when we did that episode, he had a different hydraulic system for the bridge and the truck, so he could get them basically moving and as exaggerated emotion as possible. Whereas this is a more, a little bit more of a direct version of this, and a little bit more, it's a sunbaked set piece, and it's very different. And
there's it's just a little corner they have to turn, basically. With that, it's just got a little piece of wood on it, and the wood's a little bit rotten. And I mean, I'm not going to weigh in on the grand debate, but this is a really effective use of, how can we make something that should not be suspenseful, driving carefully and cutting a corner, the most suspenseful thing in the world. And the solution is just to draw it out so you see every single agonizing detail.
Yeah, the lack of music with this, with Sorcerer, the music almost creates, like you said, there's a hellish atmosphere, and there's something almost otherworldly about their adventure that they go on, and it seems like they're diving deeper and deeper into hell. With this, with the silence and just their conversations and the tires hitting the dirt and everything like that, it just feels more, I guess, based in a reality that's more grounded, which can, in a sense, make it. I mean, you could argue that it makes it scarier, just because it's it seems more lived in our world. It's not something that they're just going into a like an alternate realm or something like that.
It's not as stylistically exaggerated. There's none of that that sequence in Sorcerer when Roy Scheider is like driving through what looks like purple Mars,
right.
you know, and like and the score is kicking in. Like there's something to be said about you know, taking this story and just being like the tactile physical logistics of it are scary enough.
Yes.
You don't actually need to emphasize, and you do find atmosphere just through the situation itself, which is because it's a fucking scary ass. Again, it's, you know, again, we're going to mention this a couple times, but this is probably just like one of the greatest thriller concepts ever conceived. And, you know, obviously part of that is Georges Arnaud, who actually was an expatriate living in South America, and who had, you know, lived or seen some version of these experiences, and who came up with this. You know, financially desperate men offered money to transport dangerous amounts of nitroglycerin through bumpy, irregular landscape and jungles and sort of like mountain passes, essentially a suicide mission. And it's such like an evocative concept. And the fact that Clouzot could go into it and be like, this could be done in more of a Howard Hawksian fashion than necessarily the most the most like stylistically overwhelming and overpowering experience. And that was maybe like the biggest point of, you know, that of difference for me, was that like I think I compared when we did Sorcerer. I was like, oh, Treasure of Sierra Madre, 100%. That is John Huston film. That is clearly in the thick of both of them, because it's just such a similar plot in terms of like the desperate, filthy Humphrey Bogart getting a team of like distrusting hustlers together to go hunting gold in Mexico, and you know, they're trying to fix this kind of like purgatorial existence, this sort of stasis that they are experiencing, and you know, they run into the logistical obstacles and start, you know, becoming sweaty and going mad and hysterical. And so like that is just baked into both of these films. But this one, and Spencer kind of clued me into it too in his review, but like it is Only Angels Have Wings. Like it's just, that's the movie. Like it's like one of the greatest hangout romances of all time. That just also happens to be this kind of like lockdown adventure movie where people are stuck on this remote island and the people are pilots, and they basically every day they risk their lives for these cargo shipments that they fly. And the one thing I've always loved about Only Angels Have Wings is so much of it takes place in like the bar, and it is just the characters being like, you know, the bleak elements that are in that film are kind of like off screen. It's like when a character leaves the bar to go fly the plane, and they're like, you know, that guy maybe is not coming home to return and sing and dance with us tomorrow night. And like that's kind of where that sort of bleakness kind of settles in. Yeah. But this kind of does the reverse, where it starts you in that here's the place that they all hang out, here's the dancing, here's the bars, here's all of this, and then we go in the planes with them. We go on the drive with them into the dark shit. So like that's just such a cool idea.
And the key difference is that, you know, Howard Hawks' vision is very like, it's both stoic and romantic. Like, you know, they're the Only Angels Have Wings really pivots off the Cary Grant character and how he's this, you know, guy who's dedicated to doing a job well, and he doesn't want to let his feelings get in the way, and you know, he refuses to mourn for any of his colleagues because that would get in the way of doing a task correctly. And this movie's having absolutely fucking none of that. This is like much like how Rio Bravo was like a response to High Noon. This probably not directly, but this feels almost like an equivalent response to Only Angels Have Wings, which is that these people are fucking insane and awful, and all these people are going to die horribly. And again, it really does feel like a Hawks film dug out if Hawks, you know, got really into Sartre or whatever, which he never would have. There's a great
it's literally the exact middle point between like Hawks's, you know, kind of more romantic hangout, more heroic kind of version of these kinds of characters, and we're pivoting our way towards the Sam Peckinpah Wild Bunch, like death drive, filthy, you know, fatalism kind of aspect to it. Instead of men, you know, sort of exploding and drowning in oil in the case here, it's like it would become slow motion gunfire. And and that kind of feels like the, you know, the sense of just like grueling on the ground texture, but having this very, you know, broadly very kind of primitive and existential, almost fable-like quality to it, as it kind of, actually traps these characters in these situations, and they realize the kind of, the situation that they're in, and how, absolutely, terrifying it is to really experience the level of kind of precarity and expendability that these, like, these workers actually do under the American company.
Yeah, and I also love the introduction, the way that he introduces the community itself. Like, right away you can tell most people are very poor and have to, they're suffering through poverty every single day.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about the bug shot, because it's the same shot as the Wild Bunch, by the way. It's literally the same shot. I was like, dude, Peckinpah, you fucking just stole it, dude. Yeah. Like the little boy trapping the like little roaches in these like contraptions in the wet mud and scorching sun of this desert town called Las Piedras.
Yeah, with the
and
tattered
I was like,
shirt,
man,
and he's got no pants, and then like you go to another family, and it seems like they're basically living in like half of tents essentially, and that's kind of how they introduce the community, and then they also introduce the characters that way too. So I like that they show the desperation of the four characters that we're going to be following, but it doesn't stray away from how the rest of the people in that community are also living, if not possibly even worse than these desperate men at times. I also like the difference here that you were just thrown into the town, rather than, I think with Sorcerer, he kind of does this mass world, like of the four characters, where he goes to each country that they belong in and kind of give a reason.
He does like
why
a globe-trotting backstory, right? Where there's like some spy shit and explosion shit, and it's pretty sick. But it's one of those things too, where it feels differently exciting. Where those characters, I think, are meant to have these backstories because they are meant to be, I don't know, they're meant to. They're going to go on this sort of like men on a mission thing of exploitative, dangerous labor, but it's meant to be more of like this almost like purgatorial punishment aspect where they have these past sins that they're almost kind of atoning for, and that there's like a grim fate kind of aspect and a more sort of like ironic bent to that I think Friedkin pushes.
Yeah, and with this, it's
whereas
like
this really just wants to
purgatory.
sink you into the leisurely atmosphere of, these guys, of these guys, the more mundane atmosphere of these guys being stuck here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, in this movie, they're just already in hell when it starts. What does it even matter, like how they got there? I also want to say the four characters, all great introductions. You get a full hour to spend with them, which is fucking insane. But like none of that is even slightly boring. And I cherish the fact that they're let you have so much time and patience before you even get to the trucks.
I kind of liked finding out just who these guys were like in the moment. That's one thing that these two films share, is that it is kind of character through action. It is like you see decisions they make. You see that we don't actually get like a huge epic backstory. We sometimes get like a line of dialogue or here, like where we find out like the blonde German guy named Bimba, played by Peter Van Eyck, like maybe has had like a father who was like killed by Nazis or something like that. Mm-hmm. Like I wasn't exactly sure what to make of the backstory that he briefly brings up in his one-to-one conversation. But you have the Frenchman Mario, played by Yves Montand, who's this very charming, handsome, kind of like playboy type, like sleeping with the local tavern girl Linda, played by Vera Clouzot, who's actually Henry Georges' wife, and also who he named his production company after when he when he was allowed to come back to France and make movies again, because he didn't want to work for like one of the sort of like more founded studios, because obviously he didn't trust them. Like they kicked them out of the country. He's like, so this is actually kind of like a really big independent movie for him, and also obviously a huge financial success, and he won the Palme d'Or and Golden Bear in the same year. This is like huge, really, really huge deal for him. But you also have this old hustler, ex-gangster, Mr. Joe, played by Charles Vanal, who's the guy who like rolls into town on his last dollar in like a white suit and leaving whatever last situation he was fast, and immediately pals around with Mario because he's the only other French guy and they relate to each other. And
and he comes off really kind of like confident, and like he's got some almost wisdom from his years prior. But then I like that it's kind of a
he also
flip.
just looks wealthy, so everyone immediately like bows to him and is like, dude, this guy's got money. He can pay for drinks. He can do, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I like that they set these little character things up, and then as they go through the process of taking the trucks and the nitroglycerin, a lot of things flip, or they just get those character traits kind of just grow exponentially and become usually more toxic, unfortunately. But
there's also more genuine friendship between these men too, right? Than even the Friedkin version.
Yeah.
Well, Mario and Joe, they have this like, I mean, for starters, their personalities definitely switch, which kind of informs the ending where, you know, Joe starts out as this like kind of arrogant hothead. Like there's a great scene where he just like gives someone he's having a bar fight with a loaded gun and says, "Fucking shoot me, asshole." Meanwhile, Mario is like the kind of more cautious one. He's the more cautious one. Like he's obviously a hothead himself, and he's fucking horrible to his wife, which is some great 1940s film misogyny right there. But he is, he's the more cautious and careful one when it starts out. Like he's very, he's a bit more deliberate. Like when Joe pulls that stunt, he's like, dude, what the fuck is your problem? I was scared shitless. And he seems pretty nervous when things start. But the two also develop this incredibly homoerotic friendship in the first hour of this movie. All of my notes, like almost all of them for the first hour, were literally just like lines that felt like it's like the ending of Double Indemnity, just how peak 40s Hollywood homoeroticism, where you've got I got a date with a man, and you got, just the two of them blowing off Vera Clouzot just to be with each other. It's a very funny little brotherly love type situation that explodes.
Yeah, he literally he introduces him to his roommate, to Mario, who's this big Italian man. He's Mario. Luigi. Mario and Luigi, the boys. Luigi spends his day sort of like laying cement, which we find out, later, like most of the labor in this community is slowly killing him. The relationship that he kind of forms there, he like replaces Luigi with Joe, and at one point even like, they get his pants muddy, and he's just like, oh, that's fine, dude, like you can have Luigi's pants. He's just changing right in front of him, just giving him his buddy's pants, and Luigi comes in, he's like, hey dude, those are my nice pants. You can't just be giving this random guy. Why do you like this guy so much? And it's just because of how he presents to, have a sense of control and have a sense of urgency and power, and he's going places, he's doing something. He came on one of the mysterious planes, which is like the only thing that goes like in or out of this entire community. I like that how they set up that this is just like, it's so many of these characters just hanging around like cantinas and taverns and just like sweating, and they're bored and they're getting annoyed and just like shitting on each other. And one dude's just like throwing rocks at dogs for
that's a great intro.
It's wild to see a lot of the community just like take the abuse essentially from the locals that have just kind of shown up and are working for the Southern Oil Company. Like I think at one point there's a guy that just starts doing the lip dip and spitting on the porch, and
he's chewing, baby, chewing that tobacco.
And the guy stands up, but then he's just like, it's too hot to fucking deal with this. Just do whatever you want to do. It seems like it's everybody's down on their luck. Even the workers themselves that are kind of taking advantage of the community, but it's still a hierarchy, of course, and I love how much time he spends on it.
Yeah, they're all being called like tramps. It's like the Mirror Universe Hawks hangout section, where instead of the relationships being comic or romantic, they're like strangely antagonistic and kind of cutthroat to one another. Bernardo. As they're all just they're all just like frustrated with the situation. There's no trains, there's no highways, the plane fare is too expensive, they don't have government IDs, and they can't get visas. There's no work except for the Southern Oil Company, because as they say, wherever there's oil, there's Americans, which is like a really pointed line, obviously, and actually part of why the film was not seen in the version that we're going to be talking about today. basically until the 1990s. It was cut by 35 to 40 minutes when it originally came out and played in the United States because they felt that it was too negative of a portrayal of American business interest and exploitation of local workers in Latin America.
I imagine it's all of the scenes of the American owners just going like, yeah, fucking kill him. Who cares? If they
don't call his mom
driver
back. What the fuck? Like, who gives a shit? Just let him die.
They have like dialogue that just openly says things like, well, we can't use the unionized workers because, you know, they're unionized. There's rules and regulations and whatever. So we'll just get one of the people that are desperate enough to do this. And if they die, well, we'll get another one. It's like, it's blatant how just evil they make the Southern Oil Company people.
Yeah. So even though everyone, including American critics, like really loved the film, especially when it played the film festivals, by the time it actually came out, they were like, nah, we got to punish this movie for being as politically clear-eyed about this unforgiving work in an unforgiving environment and the exploitation of local workers, and, you know, get paid basically nothing so that like resources on their land can be extracted and then taken back to the United States, and then of course obviously suffering the violent consequences of all of the things that go wrong. So, you know, that's why, you know, Mario is kind of taken with this guy who comes on from one of the planes, because there's an amazing shot early on that I loved of that plane. They actually got it in the shot flying overhead right past their conversation at one point that Mario's having with like the guy who like runs the cantina. And that's the one that, you know, Joe is actually going to be coming in on. And it's filled with all these eccentric people from all walks of life fleeing whatever previous situation, looking for opportunity. I love the guy who gets off the plane. He just like unloads with a goat. I was like, I don't know what he's doing, but he's got a plan. I'm going to follow that guy. Yeah.
All the luck in the world, bud.
Or Mr. Joe bribing the customs guy who's just a dude like smoking a cigar at a wooden table at the landing strip and everything. Yeah. There's a lot of like really great, like, you know, little you know, sort of community touches in the details.
Oh yeah, totally. And including a lot of the like the darker stuff. Like there's stuff where people are just having, you know, just kind of casual conversations about their day or just looking for work or whatever. And in the background, you can see people just either sleeping or dead in the dirt. And you're not quite sure at times when you're looking. There's so much detail in this first 45 minutes to an hour just to establish the environment, the atmosphere that they live in, and just how desperate they are, so that you can believe that someone would go out and do this job.
Yeah, and when they even have like the auditions for the job, again, it's like the flip on the Hawksian archetype. Like they are actively sabotaging each other to get this gig. Like they have this one Italian guy, they dangle fucking like some clothes in front of his eyes while he's auditioning for it, and he gets so upset that he doesn't get the gig, he hangs himself later in the film. And then they have another guy, the guy who threw rocks at a dog, Smurloff. He gets selected for the gig, and it's unclear what exactly Joe did to secure the gig from Smurloff, but it doesn't seem very pretty.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And also like the showing at a certain point they show the victims of the oil spill or the explosion that's happened. And even after they've seen that, like it doesn't deter them. It's just that desperation is so just heavy that they're willing to take away a job that was probably going to kill them from someone else. Like it's wild to watch them just fight for basically scraps that are going to just deteriorate them.
Yeah. And it's also like a competition on who has like the fortitude to pull it off. That's why I like that scene that Spencer mentioned when Joe is, you know, he's kind of getting used to being a dude who's has a very physical presence in the room and is very commanding, and he doesn't like music, so like no one in the bars is allowed to play music when he's in there. And there's a certain point where like Luigi comes in and he's just gotten, you know, like a little bit more money, he's gonna have a night out, and he plugs the radio in, he orders his champagne for the entire table, and you know he's having a good night, and it creates this altercation where it's like, you know, he's just trying to like have a drink and dance and sing, and Joe gets so furious he like rips the plug out, and they get into a little bit of an altercation, which results in them going up to each other's faces, and Joe pulling out the gun and being like, here, point it at me, and because I think that Luigi says like, oh, you're pretty confident when like you have that, and so then he gives it to him and is like, now you take it. It's not just who has the gun, you also need the guts. And I like the line that Luigi gets back where he's like, I'm not a murderer is the difference. Like I'm just not willing to kill you for no reason. Like I kind of have a little bit of solidarity with my fellow man who's kind of lacked in this situation. It's not like a pissing contest competition for me in the same way, because Joe kind of understands it. Joe's also coded a lot older than most of the other characters. He is meant to kind of see this life or death struggle and the financial desperation as like he's a little bit more kind of like weary of it and kind of knows the game a little bit better with some of the conversations he also has with the guy who runs the oil company who like used to drive trucks with him or something like that. He keeps trying to use him as like a little bit of an in. He's like, come on, man, you got a job for me. You got something that I can do around here. And he's like, I don't know, man. You're like me. You're kind of old, man. So leave this like dangerous shit up to the young kids. We don't need this shit anymore.
And he also says like, I can't use you for anything. Like, the guy who's at the Southern Oil Company is like, yeah, we used to smuggle narcotics together. If I hire you for anything, they'll figure shit out. Like, no, I can't do that.
Yeah, but regardless, the company needs these guys because this struggle kind of gets taken to the extremes when the oil field actually catches on fire and starts this massive fire that lights the natural land and mountains kind of like aflame, literally with the corrupt greed of the company, and leaves 13 corpses of workers behind. And obviously a lot of locals are really upset. They're talking about how it's always us who die. The gringos never die. It is we are always the ones who face this. And Joe is like, oh, what is this? Like another revolution? Like, come on, lady. But all the scenes, though, of the bosses in the aftermath are fucking wild. The way that they are like, when they turn down that call from the one injured boy's mom, and they're like, hang up, we'll call her back if he dies, which he does like a scene later.
Better not make her fucking faint.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
And or that other dude who picks up the phone with the giant fire and black smoke like blooming behind him right next to the guy in the full body cast, and he's like, the boss sends his regards. It's such an incredible image. And it reminds me of one of my favorite documentaries ever, the Werner Herzog one, Lessons in Darkness, which is the ones of the actual workers on an oil field, and the cinematography like does actually make it look like they're on like some kind of alien planet, like turning this man-made machinery into like hellfire coming out of the ground from their steel and stuff. It's incredible.
It's honestly wild how the images that he puts in sequence here, like having the rally about the people being sacrificed at work, the people are dying, they roll up with the 13 victims. They have what you just said, where it's got the smoking oil and the burn victim right next to it. And then I think immediately after that, they have natives watching the oil burn, and then they just like insult them and kick them out of the area.
Shuffling them off. They're like, get out of here. Like, what are you doing? While the guys in suits are trying to like spray it with water and shit.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild. And then I think right after that, they have the discussion about, what needs to be done about the explosion. And this is where the nitroglycerin comes into play. But even that conversation is just absolutely horrifying. So there's just a lot of sequences in here before they actually get into the truck.
Comment that you talked about, Jamie, where he was like, no unions or families makes the workers like, more expendable and like more valuable, essentially, because, like there's no family and no union to actually answer to if they die. So that actually makes them really, really great for this job. And they start riding the trucks with the megaphone, like through the community, being like $2,000 to any like third party outside contractor willing to drive a truck with literally a ton of nitroglycerin, which will explode at the slightest nudge over any kind of crack in the road or anything like that. And I like that one of the American guys too, who's like, yeah, it's too risky for me, man. Like, I was born in Texas, so he's like, I've seen lots of these missions and guys go on this shit and they do not, like, either they die and they didn't come back, or they were not the same people. Like they went through
Yeah.
some crazy, scary experience that literally like altered their brain chemistry or something like that.
Yeah.
You know,
I love
Yeah.
the emphasis of the danger when they start to just initially load in the nitroglycerin, because before this thing,
that one
before
dude
this-
who almost trips
Yeah.
with the fucking jerry can,
Before this adventure
and you
even
could see
begins.
them all just like clasp their hands together, like Jesus fucking Christ, we
Yeah.
almost all died.
And it's just like an extra too. It's not even one of the main characters or anything, and you've almost witnessed the end of the film right there. It's just like that's how much fear is pumped into you right away.
It's almost like you can't even see the last 2 hours or the last hour and a half of this movie as a series of set pieces. It's really just one long, agonizing one, basically.
Yes.
There's all these like
Totally.
tiny little grace notes too. Like there's a part where the engine just almost doesn't start. Like it's they like every single moment Clouseau can like goose you a little bit and make you a little nervous about what's going to happen. He does it. It's almost it's just unrelenting. I remember just being like, okay, there's got to be some downtime now. There's got to be some downtime now. There isn't any fucking downtime until the oil makes it there, or no, the nitroglycerin makes it there, basically.
Yep. Yeah. It's absolutely incredible.
and you know how bad it is like right off the start, because everyone is already like, this is already an incredibly dangerous place before the company is admitting that it's actually dangerous work. And they're actually saying that, yeah, this is essentially, you know, we're looking for candidates for a suicide mission. Like if you make it, you can afford a plane ticket out of here. If you don't, well, yeah, you don't. You know, like that's just how it works. And you have like Linda like chasing in the trucks behind them, being like, "Don't go, you'll die. Like you'll all die." And all the men are competing so cutthroat, like for the position. I like when the one guy's driving the truck and they literally like throw something in front of him, so he fucks up and like stops really quickly. And they're and it's basically like, "Ha, that guy doesn't have the job now." I'm like, "Great, that guy doesn't die." Like, there you
he
go.
does.
You really
He
screwed
does.
him. Well, and he does. He goes and kills himself because he needed the money that badly. But like, it's one of those cases where. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna react basically and just say it's absolutely morbid when you see that, and especially having that moment where Linda is like praying in the garden, like, please don't let the man that I love die in this incredible, like, insane
and then sees
adventure,
the feet,
and then sees the feet,
God.
and she knows exactly what like in a sense what that's coming from, and that's the same job that he's about to go on, and it's like that's just how desperate they are, and yeah, it's great. I mean, great in a horrifying way.
And then we get on the road, and again,
they split the men into groups of two, and they split them up by like 30 minutes because they were like, yeah, this is safer, and we'll flip the coin to see kind of like who who gets to go first, who gets the big blind, little blind is kind of like what they're like. Let's set this up. I love like the company is so morbid about it. They are so just like, yeah, you know, you guys kind of know exactly what you're signing up for. We held up a giant reward sign. You guys kind of killed one of you maybe killed another one to even get a position here. Yeah. And you know, now you guys are doing it. One of my one of the details between this and Sorcerer that I thought was pretty funny was obviously Sorcerer is called that because they have that whole montage where they actually have to jerry rig like their own trucks. They actually like weld them, they make them, right? They're kind of part of the machinery. This one, the company just hands them shit, and the truck just reads explosives in the place where it reads Sorcerer in the other film. It's literally just on the giant truck, and you have Joe like testing the tire pressure and the headlights and all of this, and
it's
being
wild
like,
too,
you know,
to have the owner of the company, or at least the manager that's making these decisions. He's actively, even as they're getting into the truck and about to leave, he's actively telling them to move faster so that it doesn't waste the company's money. And you're like, you already know the situation that they're in, and you're still like, let's go, fucking vamoose, here we go, come on.
Yeah,
now.
while it's claustrophobically framing them in the like flammable metal container. Yeah. That horrible detail that Joe doesn't even know how to work the contact in it when the engine doesn't go, and you know, Mario has to literally be like, dude, you have to hit that, like, you know. yeah and you know, and then they're on their way, and we're observing every little bump and shake and tire sinking into mud, or you know, the rattles and creaks of the metal in the engine, and they're grimacing, you know, like sweat covered faces as they actually hit the road and encounter the series of obstacles. And for anyone who's seen Sorcerer, many of the obstacles are quite similar, but I do think that the movie actually does them in a different way. They did kind of approach the set pieces slightly differently in terms of some of the actual suspense and dramatics of them.
There's 4 big ones.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the big one is the corrugated road one.
Yeah. The first big one is like the washboard, is what they call it. That's a great name for a road of death, the washboard, where they basically have to stay above 40 miles an hour. I'm not making this up. Like, it's literally some speed shit they have to do. And they have to stay
they either have to go
it.
really, really slowly and it takes a long time, or they have to hit it already going 40 miles per hour and maintain that speed the whole time. Because if they hit that speed, they are actually going over the bumps fast enough that they aren't vibrating as much. So either it's like do it in 10 minutes and go really fast, or go really slow and have it take you like hours.
Yes. And naturally what happens is that the ones who are up first, because it's funny, they fuck up the plan almost immediately because Joe gets such bad nerves. Like it's a very, like, for the main guy, it's a very slow transfer. Like for Mario, he goes from someone who's kind of nervous and timid into the more foolhardy one and the more like courageous one. And Joe almost immediately like withers away and turns terrified. Yeah. So they actually stop and they have Luigi and Bimba pass the two of them. Luigi and Bimba get on the road, and about like, I don't know, like 4/5 of the way there, they have to stop their car, and they slow down, and it's like, all right, we've slowed down, we've got to take this for the rest for like 4 miles. And then naturally, when Joe and Mario fucking hit the road, they're going not just like 40, they're doing like 50, because this is already at the point where Mario's like, I'm the fucking boss, I got this. And that it's one of the best sequences ever, where they basically they have that moment where both of them, they can't do anything. One can't speed up, one can't slow down. And both, you cut between both groups, and both of them are like, well, this is just probably it right here.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild. I also like the the whole idea when they do stop initially, that at first they're kind of like, well, we'll just take a break and slow down and we'll go from there. But there is some people in the group, I believe it might be Luigi, where he almost seems to have a sense of pride in his work, and he doesn't seem as fearful as the rest of them. And he's like, well, it's our job. We'll get there. We need to get there on time and faster. And I think it might be Mario that says, it's like, well, what is it? It's something like, what does it matter? We're already on the road. We have one destination. We're going the same place. So do we really need to have this kind of like, we get it right in on time kind of mentality for this job?
Yes.
And it results in this later down the road with the like 20 minutes later or whatever, when they're almost colliding. So yeah, I think it's a great setup and payoff.
Yes.
Yeah, and the fact that Mario pushes it until he is like literally inches away from that vehicle.
Yeah, they start counting down or something it's like,
yeah, the cutting back and forth of like the point of view shots like attached to the outside of the mirrors, where you can see the trucks actually getting closer together with one another. Like they conceive that situation so well, and then like your brain kind of puts the rest of the pieces together as it's happening. It's like watching a slow motion train crash. That doesn't end up happening, which is why the movie is filled with so much like set up, and then just at the last minute kind of takes away that payoff, and in a way that is pretty consistently satisfying, because it all plays as one set piece. Like even with now the now infamous, due to Friedkin's version as well, the big like suspension bridge sequence. In this one, it's a precipice like platform they need to reverse onto in order to make a hairpin turn, essentially, and the tire collapsing under the rotting wooden planks. And I like to like Luigi and the German guy hit at first, Bimba, and Luigi just immediately like puts the stick underneath the wood under it, and he just rolls over and he's out. And it's a little bit of a tense moment, but he doesn't actually get that close to the edge, and he has someone there helping him the entire time. When it's Mario and Joe's turn to pass, and they're passing by like the graves of the dead workers who have like were previously hauling iron, you could just see Joe's face just like sinking, and then the giant signs with skulls on them, and they're still going to basically cross and pull this move despite all of these signifiers that death is incoming. And Joe just becomes increasingly more cowardly in the face of the actual obstacles, and he sees the weakness of the platform and of the rotting wood, and he just starts like basically like freaking the fuck out. And when he nearly falls off because Mario is taking it as close to the edge of the platform as he can possibly take it to avoid the hole that the other guys left, Joe takes that opportunity to literally go and like hide in the mountainside. There's even like this great shot of him looking down at the truck, just kind of like spying on it, being like, wow, I wonder if Mario can pull this off. And Mario has to fucking do that whole thing on himself, reverse his way to the edge, and then start trying to make his way out, and he can't roll over it because he's the tires are sinking in, and he has to go and grab the branches himself and put the branches underneath his own tires so that he can kind of like roll over them. And seeing that whole set piece, and obviously also too the location work for this is incredible, like that actual vista on the cliffside and everything, and seeing Mario framed against it, like it really does set up the level of danger that you're actually experiencing too, which is also why having that genius moment when he almost rolls over the side and he actually has to like stand over the side of it and look down briefly and everything, like he gives you every visual cue that this is like disaster is incoming. And seeing Mario kind of pull this job off by himself is like one of the more impressive technical feats that one of the characters pulls off.
One of the best parts
Oh no, I was about to say that something I wanted to single out about this is that Clouzot managed to basically do the same set piece twice. Like he has Luigi and Bimba, and that one is really tense too. Like there's a great little shot of the tires just like the tires just like slip a little bit off the wood or whatever. Like there's so many great shots of tires just slightly fucking up in this movie. Yeah. And they have the rotten wood that they discover, and it's like, oh, well, it's whatever. And then they drive out, and it's really, really tense because of how precarious it is. And then it gets even worse when Mario and Joe have to do the same thing. And the whole like precipice, the whole wooden outreach just like collapses under him at the very end. So I gotta like give props here where he does the whole set piece twice, and he makes it like scarier the second time.
It's tense both times that you watch it.
And the use of like, there's so much suspense and tension, obviously, but the small little bits of relief that he gives you just so he can throw you back into the suspense again is amazing. Like in this one sequence, like we were talking about, he's backing up and Joe falls off, and then he kind of like frantically looks for him and everything, but then when he goes up and he uses the branches to get off of the platform, he gets caught on the that wire that's holding up the platform. So you're like, okay, sweet, he's gotten through the mudslide. He's not going to slide off the platform. He's figured it out. And then all of a sudden, there's another problem that you have to worry about, and he's not even aware of this one. So you just as an audience member,
you're watching that suspension wiring like actually start to pull and give way as he's like just about to make it over, just, like as the tires are just squeaking over the edge of everything like that. Like all of the very minute, like methodical detail, even in just like images and textures and, little tiny, sort of like technical pieces like another filmmaker made, it does really work as like a piece of clockwork engineering in terms of, both the suspense and also technically, as Spencer was kind of putting it at the very beginning, like actually following the process of thinking that these characters are making and decisions that they're making, and the way that it invites the audience to just have the same thought process as the characters, like really gets you involved in that, right?
100%. And I do also like, this is kind of the beginning of the deterioration of the friendship between Joe and Mario, because I think this is right after he gets off the platform successfully, just in the nick of time. He starts driving off, and Mario is literally like running after him, trying to get back into the truck or whatever.
Because at this point he's just like, dude, like you may have like brains or whatever, and I maybe like respected you, but like you don't have the guts that you pretended to have in the civilized world.
And unfortunately with this job,
and you're not as valuable to me because I'm gonna drive both of us and do all of these jobs by myself, and then you're gonna get paid just as much as me? He's like, no, like fuck you. And I love that Joe's like, bro, it's called the division of labor. Come on, man, like share the load.
Oh right, I gotta correct myself. I did think I said Mario was running. I guess it's Joe and Mario's driving, I believe. But Mario
is the one driving, and he's the one who's in the young kid with balls mode. I think Joe is like, I can't just recklessly like plunge into things like you do anymore, like
Right.
I'm not a young kid. And he's like, no, you're like a walking corpse, like you're just like not useful at all, no one. And that's just it too, is he starts thinking like the company, right? This guy is only as useful as he is for the task or the job.
Yes.
Which is, like something both films kind of share in that way.
Yeah, that's true. It's like
the
friendship almost is forcefully destroyed just based on the job that they're doing, really. Because it's like there's no room for a real relationship in this. It's just try to survive and get through it. And if you're not going to help, then it's hard to see you as an equal in that moment, I would imagine, just because they're in such a desperate situation.
There's two little details I wanted to note. And the first is that there's like a great little mirror. I believe it's in this scene when, like, early on when they're driving away in the truck, Vera Clouzot's character like runs up to them and Mario just pushes her away, basically just shuts the door on her. Mm-hmm. And then I think during this scene, that's exactly what the exact same thing Mario does with Joe. There's a lot of great like parallels between there's a lot between Linda and Joe, which again heightens the homoerotic tension happening here. But also, I just wanted to add that one thing that Joe says is that you drive, I feel the fear for you, basically. And it sounds just like the rationalization of an insane person, and it is. But as we find out later, it's more accurate than either of them gave it credit for.
Because once they finish that set piece, they move on to the blowing up of the giant boulder, which is different because in Sorcerer we talked about it. That's the one where they do the tree, and I remember we talked about in that episode too that Friedkin was maybe a little bit too much on his shit in that one when he like flew in a legitimate arsonist and was like, can you like really blow this fucking shit up in front of all my actors and probably hurt them? Like,
let's go. That's directing, baby.
in this case. Luigi has to use a metal rod to drill like a 30-inch hole into a giant boulder, and Bimba has to siphon some nitroglycerin out of a jerry can to put it in, which is also just like a horror. Like I wouldn't have wanted to be in that position of having to siphon it out of like essentially like a gas can and have it drip into like a little like functionally like a canister and then slowly pour it into the boulder hole after. It's like it's really, really tense moment, and this is one of the more effective scenes where I noticed the lack of music and also the sound design, because Luigi's pounding on the stone kind of takes like this metronome effect as he's just hitting it over and over while we're even cutting away from him and going to like Bimba's eyes as he's like tensely pouring the liquid from the canister into this, and you can still hear the noises and everything. So, and also the cutting away to, some of the characters chewing or tapping in anticipation of the, the liquid finally reaching the center right before the explosion is actually about to go off. I love that when they eventually light the fuse and they start like scrambling like roaches. And it's like, holy shit, what if a piece of rock like hits one of the trucks? They were like, oh, whoops, we didn't think that one through.
We're just trying to get this job done. Yeah, it does become very like, they're coming up with these really focused and great ideas to get through each situation, but there's always something that they don't think about because, you got to move fast in this situation. So,
I love they're running back to the trucks. They're like, can we move the trucks in time before this rock explodes? And like Luigi's trying to run back to try to like get the fuse out. And eventually they all just have to like grit their teeth and as the boulder explodes. And as all the pieces of rock start like pelting the trucks, they're all just like, ah.
Yeah, one of the best shots is I think it's not Luigi because I think he's the one that runs, but it might be Joe. And it closes in on his face as he just has the most tense look as he's looking at the one container that they were using that probably has a little bit of nitroglycerin left. And there's just rocks not hitting it, but almost hitting it by like probably a couple inches or something like that. And it's just the tension that you can see in his face is unbelievable. I also love the detail that, and I think we probably mentioned this in Sorcerer, but just how little nitroglycerin they need in order to have the biggest explosion ever to destroy this 50-ton rock. And how much is still left in the trucks themselves. So it's just that you just get it into your brain. You're like, if this is just this small little, like, I don't know, tablespoon.
Yeah, he loves feeding you information so that you can just be like, oh man, that makes it so much worse now that they're doing this. And you keep accumulating information in your mind that teaches you how to watch the coming set pieces where you're like, oh my God, that makes that so much worse. Or even showing something to you twice so you know what to pay attention to and what details to be like, oh my God, that tire, it's going to go through that fucking piece of rotten wood or, any of that. One of my favorites is that they all make it through the boulder set piece, and just as like a stroke of random fate, Luigi and Bimba, the truck in front of them blows up. It just explodes like miles in front of them while Joe is casually rolling tobacco. And both movies do this sequence really, really well, where they're just like, they first feel and hear the blast with the tobacco just like being blown out of his hand. And then they look up and they can see the pulverization of these two guys they just did a set piece to and bonded with through, because both of these movies are kind of also bonding, men bonding through work. And that's a sequence where they actually felt a little celebratory about what they did. Like they pulled that off.
They're hugging and kissing each other.
Yeah. It's a bad thing to celebrate in this movie because something bad always happens afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just like that sense of relief after blowing up that rock is just in a sudden random instant, those two guys are just exploded. And that was it. Like we don't even experience it from their perspective. We just see it in the distance and we're like, oh, those are two dead guys now, and that's their precarious existence was just snuffed out. That's it.
That's the one. Oh, go on, Jamie.
Oh, it's just, and for me, that's the big difference of, like in this sequence, it's like between Sorcerer and this one, because Sorcerer has a more, they try to do a little, and I like it. I really like the way that Sorcerer goes about it, but they do a more personal thing where you're actually in the truck with them, and he's reminiscing about his wife, I believe, and he's just like, it's 9:00 in Paris, and like he's relating that to the time that, where his wife is located and all of that, and then he hits a rock, and the thing just fucking explodes. Like it's just in the middle of them actually having a good heart-to-heart with each other. And then it cuts to Scheider looking at the explosion, and we, as an audience, we've seen it both times, basically, from both perspectives. But yeah, with this one, just having the cold, we see them go off in the distance, and we don't even know as an audience member that that's the last time we're going to see them, and you just get it from Mario and Joe. That, like, there is a bit of an extra coldness to that I found.
And the role reversal between the two men too, right? Where Joe goes like, poor Luigi, like he was like a friend to him because he watched him pull off that amazing set piece, where Mario just goes, yeah, whatever. He took a chance and lost it.
Yeah, you just saw Luigi survive when he ran into the explosion or whatever, and you thought he was just dead on the ground for a second. And you're like, okay, there's a relief there too. He's alive. They made it through, and then 10 minutes later, just done.
Gone.
I mean, for starters, I promised Josh I wouldn't get into a whole Sorcerer versus Wages debate, qualitatively.
I was like, respect Friedkin.
Yeah, no, I was not interested. All the comparisons I wanted to make here would be strictly academic. The one place where I will plant my flag, like pretty firmly in the camp for Wages, is that I do think I like it a lot better that there's absolutely no warning or preamble to Bimba and Luigi's truck just exploding. Like the two of them, they have this very good conversation where, again, there's a running theme of hubris in this movie, like a running theme of just you think you can tame the world around you and you can't. And Bimba has this very speech while he's shaving himself, and he says, like, I was in a Nazi POW camp. Like, nitroglycerin means nothing to me. Then you cut back to them, and all of a sudden the explosion just happens. No idea what happened. You don't get like a rock hitting the truck. No one know. They are not going to fucking know why the truck blew up. So why should you?
Yeah. And that's the thing too. You don't get a later scene too where they like find the bodies and have some moment of like a spiritual goodbye or something like that. It's just they're incinerated, they're gone, and you're never going to see them again. You don't even see the truck explode. You just see a big explosion in the distance. It's one of the coldest things I've ever seen in a movie, honestly.
Yeah, well, and I will say if we're going to be on this note as well, there's one set piece for me where I will firmly, I think, land on the Wages side, even though I absolutely, I mean, if people can go back and listen to Jamie and I talk about Sorcerer, fucking love that film.
Yeah, I think it's
so
a
much about it
masterpiece.
that I love. There's stuff that it does differently that I think it does differently incredibly well. I think these are both really, really masterful approaches to this.
Agreed.
There's one set piece in this that I was blown away by because it's so different from Sorcerer, and I was unspoiled and unprepared for this, and basically this entire sequence, because the version in Sorcerer, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I'm pretty sure it's like they run into some bandits and get into like a gunfight.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in this version, there's a fight between Joe and Mario, who basically, you know, they need to finish the mission out together, and
They have to go through a thick pool of oil.
Yeah, and Joe is obviously really upset that, like, oh my God, that easily could have been us. This is such a fucked up thing, and I'm not willing to take risks. And obviously that explosion has created a problem where there's now a crater on the path that they were taking, and the explosion also punctured an oil pipeline. So that
we've been
has
following
filled
the
this
whole time too, which I like. Just that you've seen the image of the pipeline; it's kind of been their guide the whole time, and now it's the very thing that's stopping them from their final. destination.
Making the oil like actually kind of the obstacle in this is really, really obviously like it's a very great symbolism, but it, you know, it's also just logistically, it's also in crazy in terms of the imagery they get to come up with, where they have to drive through what looks like a lake of oil.
Ray has never looked more evocative than it does in this pool of oil.
Yeah,
it is probably my favorite sequence in the film in terms of just like the pure imagery that it comes up, because it's the closest he gets to doing something that is incredibly it is logistically, you know, accurate, I guess you could say, but it is so like, that's such a concept that no one else would, you know, there's no lake of oil that you would ever have to actually drive through, except in the specific circumstances of these guys driving a ton of nitroglycerin right next to a pipeline that these guys need to follow behind. Like, it's such a specific situation to get to this setting. But once they get there and Joe actually needs to guide Mario through it, and once he starts driving, they both agree he can't stop driving. Like, he'll get stuck. If he wants to make it through the whole thing, he needs to maintain momentum, or else he'll risk getting stuck. Yep. So Joe at one point gets stuck on a branch that's within the crater that he didn't see, and he's stuck there, and he can't move out of the way of the truck as Mario is moving. And as they both agreed, he can't stop. And the moment of Mario just seeing that he might run over this guy and kill this guy, and he just decides to do it. And the screams of Joe as he's barely staying afloat above the oil, and it looks like he's like drowning in tar. And these actors really did perform this, you know, like in oil and stuff. Like, it's fucking crazy.
Yeah, and what's wild too, that one shot, because I love that at first you can kind of see him swimming through it, and you see kind of the sides of the oil, and you can see a little bit of the truck, and then as it gets deeper and deeper, he just gets more and more covered to the point where it almost looks entirely just like oil, even though Joe is right in the middle of the frame. It's like the only thing that you can see that has any whiteness is his eyes when they open up every once in a while, or at least try to. It's crazy just how disgusting.
And Joe just being like, you knew you were running me over and you went ahead, because he doesn't die. The tires just crush and amputate his legs, and you actually get Mario like pulling him out of the oil, like he's pulling him out of water. And as we slowly see more of his legs, man, like his legs are fucking ripped in half underneath the fucking pants, man. It's like,
the bones
it's
have been
horrible.
pulverized.
And I love that Mario also says, hey, I hesitated. That's why I got stuck. You know, but he still did it anyway.
So I cared a little bit. I hesitated.
That almost makes it worse, because it's like, well, if you knew you were going to get stuck then from hesitating, you should have fucking stopped then. But no, he's like, I'm just going to fucking run your legs right the fuck over. It's just like it's such a completely inhuman decision, and to have it accentuated by like the image of the pure, like, cruel steel machinery and oil just like ripping this man to pieces while he's screaming in the frame. Like, it's fucked.
There's also a huge irony to the fact that Mario would have never been able to figure out how to do it without Joe. I'm pretty sure Joe is who came up with the plan of how you would go about getting through this sludge. He goes into the actual oil and like takes out tree branches and stuff. to try to free up the location.
Yeah, even without legs, he helps them figure the trick on how to do it after. He's like, let's use the crowbars and hook them to the axles, and there's a way to do that, but only after Mario is teasing him with water. He's like, I need water. He's like, I'll give you water if you tell me how to get out.
Yeah,
like that. Yeah,
oh my god.
Yeah, no, the two really do like need each other desperately. That's like that's something the movie pains to illustrate, is that Joe's sheer terror, as like frustrating as it is the only thing keeping them alive, basically.
Yeah.
And there's also a great moment after the scene is done. He pulls Joe back into the truck, and the two have this very cute embrace with each other in the car. They're like huddled up next to each other trying to get there. And Mario relates a story about I forget what the specific thing was, but there's a line in it that kind of outlines the movie's whole existentialist philosophy, where they're talking about looking beyond a fence. And we just wanted to look beyond the fence, and then Joe asked him,
they're feeling nostalgic for Paris, and he's saying, "Oh, I know that street in Paris. There's like a tobacco shop there. There's a hardware store there," and he's trying to keep him awake by trying to get him to, almost like a little fucking like children's riddle. He's like, "What's the next shop? What's the next shop?" And then there's a fence, and then after he gets to the fence, he keeps saying, "What's after the fence?" And he just goes, "Nothing."
Nothing.
Like he can't remember, or legitimately it's like his brain is dying on him, or there's an empty lot, or exactly. It's just and just seeing Mario react to like there's nothing at the end of this, and like all that the actual life is like the decisions kind of in the present in that moment. And man, that's just like such a like a dark moment for him.
The moment that freezes my blood when I watch this movie is when Joe's like final words as he lies dying down, and like the very last thing he does before all the life drains out of him is he just screams, "There's nothing," and then just fucking collapses. And it's like, oh, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the vocal performance, the way he screams that too, is incredibly just desperate, and he doesn't. There's almost like a falsetto to it. His voice cracks a little bit. Like it's just he can see that he's dying. He can feel it, and there's just such a desperation to it. It's very sad. I also like the fade in that they do when he initially gets into the truck again, and I think it's at like the corner of the hood, and it starts to drive, and he just fades it in the same spot of the camera into night, just to kind of emphasize how long they've been traveling and how lost they still are. And you have Joe beside Mario, basically on his lap at this point, just dying.
They're huddled together, stained with the oil from the actual going through the crater that they were doing. And I love too that Mario at one point is like, "Hey dude, stop shaking, man." And he's like, "I'm not Nitro. Like, I'm good. Like, I'm not, I'm not going to explode you, man. I'm a human who's dying and cold." Like,
and that's the thing too. It is very, just like I've said a few times now, it's very cold compared to kind of that more surreal nightmare dreamscape thing that they do at the end of Sorcerer. This one is just like, go into the darkness of the woods and your only friend is dying in your lap.
And you don't even like him, because previously you respected him previously, and over the course of the journey you've come to actually really dislike this guy, versus like Luigi, who he was like actually previously friends with and kind of showed himself to be a good worker on the on the job that they were doing. It was funny that him and Luigi kind of break up in the early scenes and actually kind of gradually learn to respect one another when they both realize that they're like willing to be young and reckless and actually get this job done with one another.
Yeah.
And then when Mario eventually actually makes his way to the fire, because the other two guys exploded and Joe has died in the truck while they're making their way there, and the way that he cries and like turns the ignition key, which cuts to the fire raging and the crew, all there with the suits in the water and the dirt trying to contain it and everything like that. And I love that the first thing that the fire crew does is, rip the dude covered in oil a match for his cigarette. They're like, man, this guy's come a long way. He needs a fucking smoke. Get him, get this guy fucking going, as he's like stumbling almost like drunkenly and exhaustedly like towards the flames until he's like collapsing. Like he's pulled off this Herculean task. and he's just like this hollowed out, man, kind of as a result of it. And I think we talked about it on the sorcerer thing too. It is always so funny that all of this is in the name of like the company just like not losing some profits. Yeah, that it's like, hey, the workers can like clock in tomorrow now. Like that's great, like and like that's what it always is. Like the fact that he arrives there and like nobody realizes the kind of journey that they've been on.
Yeah, they're all just happy to have their jobs back so that they have at least some security. But it and in a sense you're happy for those workers because we've seen their desperate situation back in town, but after you've seen,
but even at the beginning, it wasn't good. They were complaining about it there too. Like it was fucking scary,
Yeah, by no means. But there is just that dark irony of seeing people like just happy that they have now some type of resource, even though it's still in this absolute hellscape and filled with people that clearly don't care about you. Like as he collapses, as Mario collapses, the same company head leader guy is like, he's just sound asleep, and almost with a smile on his face. It's just pure evil.
Yeah. I have to ask all like both of you. When it comes to an ending, both endings, Sorcerer, Wages of Fear, both pretty bleak. Yeah. Is there a preference to the ending? Because I love both of them.
I do,
but I will say there's something about this one. I don't know if it is the age of the film, maybe, or something. I found it so grim that it actually kind of made me laugh.
Okay,
whereas
I did too.
Sorcerer, I had the opposite. Where I mean, maybe it's the score cluing me into the dark, grim mood, and maybe it's because it like the shot choice is so different. Where like Friedkin is like he goes back into the cantina and he's going to move on with his life, and there's a sort of like cyclical fable like grimness to the idea of like the gangster who he was previously running away from finally finds him just as he actually survives the suicide mission, and we get it in like the crane pulling out and we hear the gunshot going off on the inside and you don't actually see it. It's just like there's this there's a lot of mood and atmosphere to that, a lot of slowness to that, versus like this sequence is fucking crazy of them giving Mario back the truck and he's like, no, I don't need a chauffeur, I'm just going to drive it myself. And it's cross-cutting with the cantina being like, oh my God, like Linda's like, oh my God, Mario's coming back. Everyone get the drinks going, get the dancing going. And it's cross-cutting literally between, it's the one piece of music in the film.
It's the Blue Danube.
Yeah, because and it's almost got like this waltz-like movement to it, and he is literally swerving back and forth with the steering wheel like a madman on his way back. You presume because he's like just really happy to be alive, and he's like, now I can drive like crazy because before I had to drive really slowly.
I'm invincible now.
Yeah, I'm invincible, and the camera is like swerving and canting with the level of excitement as it's cross-cutting between the dancing that he's going back to, and he just loses control, rolls off the side of the cliff, and you get one of the sickest practical car crashes I've probably seen, of that truck just going down those mountains and the sirens going off and his bloody face, and it happens so fast, and it's such an animated build-up to it of his happy face and swerving back and forth that I actually did. I kind of chuckled. I was like, oh my God. But then obviously you think about it and it's the same idea. It's like, death is still coming for us all, and none of this work is pretty or heroic, and everyone was still expendable and everything. So like it all makes sense to me, but tonally, the way that this ending is handled is, I was like, that's so ridiculously grim.
Yeah. I think it's just the juxtaposition of the two tones that he chooses to take before he delivers just an insanely grim ending. Because I kind of had the same thing. Even in my notes, I've realized as I was watching the sequence, I was saying stuff just like Linda's excited about Mario's return, they're dancing, and then I start like kind of catching on to what is going on here for this ending. I'm like, this seems strange. This has got to be leading somewhere. I literally put that. And I was just kind of like... I felt as if knowing the ending of Sorcerer, having it be as grim as it is, and having this film pretty much relay the exact same emotions throughout, that the ending was going to have something like that. And I guess I didn't expect the juxtaposition of just super happy dancing and upbeat music for the first time in 2.5 hours to death, just blatant death, reckless death. Like it was And they even emphasized
honestly, this feels like a way that Wile E. Coyote would die. Like, I'm just saying.
Well,
like,
totally. So I do love the ending for Sorcerer, and I think like it's the mournful tone fits it a little better. I will say though that knowing I love this ending, the first time I saw it, I shouted "What the fuck" at my TV like 20 times.
I definitely did.
But I love the ending, and when I first saw it the first time, it's what like officially sealed the deal for me. Like, yes, this is it. This is a masterpiece. And I know I have many friends and many people. It's a pretty controversial ending generally. Like, it's either like, oh, that's perfect, or what the hell, where did that come from? So I was taking notes the entire time, looking for ways to bolster my thesis that this film is about hubris, and the hubris, like, you know, he thinks that he's won. He thinks that he's done all of this.
Death.
Yeah, no, and he hasn't, obviously. Again, it mirrors very nicely.
So your argument is like it's a Final Destination ending.
Yeah, I mean, it mirrors really nicely with the scene before Bimba and Luigi bite it, where Bimba, again, shaving, says, you know, I lived in a POW camp for 3 years. Nitroglycerin is nothing to me. Boom, there it goes. And this is the similar thought process. Like, I just delivered a ton of nitroglycerin. A bunch of roads are nothing to me. And again, it also, like, now that Joe's gone, his fear is gone. And it's sort of, he's inherited Joe's recklessness. He's basically doing the same thing Joe did at the beginning of the movie, where he hands the loaded gun and slaps the guy and says, come on, kill me. There's a lot of very almost literary like mirrors and reflections with it one at a time. And again, I think the intercutting it with the waltz that may or may not be in his head is with the driving, like the driving syncing up with the swaying. That's just so fucking sick. I love that so goddamn much.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the only thing that just kind of felt strange to me, at least on this initial watch, was just the tone, just that quick cut to the most grim ending ever. But I will say, I think it really does fit in a lot of ways, especially just given how, you know, kind of disrespectful Mario seemed to be with Linda, even though Linda's like head over heels with him. And he didn't seem to have a lot of appreciation for even the small little things that he had in that community. And in that scene, he finally does kind of realize it. He seems to be excited to see everybody. At least it seems to imply that. He doesn't outright say it, but it's heavily implied if you're cutting back to Linda dancing and him swerving on the road. And then for that to just be taken away the moment he realizes that it is kind of a good thing to have. There is a real dark irony to that, and I think that it works really well with what they were setting up in the beginning. But yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't mind even after this episode just rewatching the last 10 minutes again to see that wild change, just to see how I feel about it again. I really do love it. I think it's great. I guess I'm more used to the straightforwardness of the ending of Sorcerer. But I don't know. I gotta say, this one, it surprised me, and I did get a real visceral reaction from that ending. So hard to say.
Same. Yeah. Well, pivoting towards reductive rating round on this one, it's probably clear from this discussion. This one, 5 for me. Pretty easily, honestly. This is again for me, we're talking about a lot of masterpieces that, that this is kind of coming from and also stem from it. Like, again, having the connection to Howard Hawks's Only Angels Have Wings, which I think is something that Sorcerer doesn't really have, both having the Treasure of Sierra Madre connection, and obviously both also having the Wild Bunch connection. One of my favorite things about that is that I see so much of what Peckinpah did in terms of that, that fatalistic tone coming from this. And then when Friedkin went to make Sorcerer, we talked about it on that episode, he hired the screenwriter of The Wild Bunch to actually update Wages of Fear, essentially. So, like, movies are all kind of in conversation with each other. In my opinion, they are all masterpieces. And again, for 1953, I had to have imagined this was like a rollicking fucking blockbuster of like a French film that's playing a film festival. I couldn't even imagine being at like fucking the Cannes Film Festival in 1953 and seeing, this beside, one of the like art dramas that came out this year. You would have been levitating. It's just still among the bleakest, most like expertly, sort of crafted visions of what it, probably would feel like to live inside the levels of precarity and expendability that, these, workers do under these exploitative conditions in Latin America and due to the American oil companies and everything like that. So I think it's very politically clear-eyed. It's very incredibly made in terms of just being a pure white-knuckle procedural thriller and conceiving of situations and obstacles that are, very clearly, based in some kind of reality, but so logistically extreme and handled with such a blunt and direct effectiveness by Clouzot that they end up turning into something that feels grueling and existential. Like, again, I was so shocked by that sequence where they have to drive through the crater of oil and he literally like fucking amputates his fucking legs, choosing to kill him so that it doesn't, so that it benefits the company and literally doesn't slow down the machinery that he is committed to, and starting to getting him thinking like the logic of the company and everything, and, testing the levels of psychology and friendship. I do think that this film actually has a lot more conversation and friendship between the characters in a way that I find revealing. Like the Mario and Joe relationship is really, really developed, and the way that they switch positions of, acting more filled with confidence and having guts versus, the young guy who actually displays it when the time comes up, but also displays it to a pretty immoral level at the same time. So yeah, either way, easy 5 for me. Even going into it knowing the incredible, like physically arduous beats and scenes that were coming. And even the fact that he does some of the sequences twice, it doesn't matter. Like the filmmaking is so effective. It so works that, I don't think there's anyone who could watch this and not like, be fucking, claws on their fucking seats. Like, Jesus Christ, like what the fuck? Like I can't watch another second of this, but at the same time, you can't look away because it teaches you to do that. So yeah, 5 for me, pretty easy, handily.
Yeah, me too. This was a very, very easy 5. It's pretty awesome to have 2 movies tell the same story that I love, and they do it in different ways. Like these sequences are incredibly different from each other compared to the Friedkin one. And it was an absolute treat to go over it again and see a director do it just as well, but differently. I agree. I really like the Mario and Joe relationship and how they kind of switch personalities as the film goes on. And there's just more truth about how they actually portray themselves versus who they actually are. I think that's great. I do agree that I think the sequence, especially with the oil crater, is honestly much better than the one in Sorcerer. And I think just speaks to overall what the theme of these films are. The story is better than the bandit sequence, as much as I still do like it. But like having the actual oil, the actual product that they're helping produce, stop them, and then you also see one of the characters completely covered in it, consumed by it, and eventually it kills him. I think it just speaks to the themes a lot better, and it's just a hell of a sequence.
Well, and also having a character like Mario choose to do that to him too. Like I don't remember a character in Sorcerer making a choice quite that disturbing and cruel. I agree.
About. There is kind of, even near the end, more of a humanity a little bit. There's a little bit of a difference, I guess, when like Scheider shows up to the oil rig, because I do remember him collapsing like entirely on his own, and the first thing that the people grab is the product instead of check on him, and I did kind of like that right, detail. Yeah. But regardless, I mean, this thing it's flawless. I think it's an incredible thriller. It's one of the best suspense movies ever made, just like Sorcerer, in my opinion, and I'm just happy to be in love with both of them. I got to check out more of Henry Georges. How do you say his Georges Clouzot?
Henry Georges Clouzot.
Yeah, because I mean, he obviously has such a control, and also Armand Thurard, incredibly good-looking movie. Just the black and white, the fades from day to night as they're traveling. It's fantastic. So yeah, 5 out of 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, 5 out of 5 for me too. I mean, I've said my piece here. I mean, the whole film looks, as you've said, incredibly beautiful. The restoration by Criterion also is just so fucking amazing. Like, I'm used to movies from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, even when they get pristine 4K remasters, like still having some wear and tear on them. But this just looks as good as it did at the time. And I don't know, it's a film, it's one of the best just in terms of filmmaking, in terms of sound design. There's so many superlatives you can confer onto it. It's really just one of the best movies ever made. It's one of the best thrillers ever made. And if I wanted to show someone a foreign black and white movie to prove that movies from that time can still be exciting and fun and terrifying, absolutely this would be near the top of the list. So yes, easy 5 for me.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for The Wages of Fear. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about TROU, or The Hole.
Gaspard!
Quoi? Qu'est-ce qu'il y a?
Ça y est, regarde! Joe!
All right, we are back, and we are talking TROU, aka The Hole, the 1960 French prison break thriller directed by Jacques Becker, based on the 1957 novel called The Break by Jose Giovanni, which itself was based on a real 1947 prison escape attempt. And this time starring a bunch of actors I'm mostly unfamiliar with.
They're mostly non-actors.
Yeah, most of them are non-actors, and some of them were ones who I think had careers maybe after the fact. Like I know that Marc Michel was in Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and Philippe Leroy was in The Night Porter, and Michel Constantin ended up doing a bunch of 70s like Bronson movies at one point. But yeah, this is definitely Becker's sort of his approach to this was he wanted it so authentic and grounded to the point of he just wanted, guys who actually had done prison time or in some of the cases here actually were part of this exact prison escape attempt. And this is our first time talking about Jacques Becker because as Spencer was kind of mentioning to us sort of like off recording there, not someone who's particularly well known in French filmmaking circles, which is a lot of people kind of look at, especially when they cinephiles first get into French film. It's very director heavy. It's very auteur heavy. It's very, here are the big names. There are my Truffauts. There are my Rivettes, my Godards, and Becker is one of these guys who made films around the same time, was really respected by a lot of these guys. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, he was even the assistant in the 1930s to Jean Renoir. So like, and he made cameo appearances in some of his films, including the Grand Illusion, which is like his biggest movie. So it's like one of these things where like, it's interesting that this guy has kind of fallen under, the radar for a lot of people because I guess his filmography just doesn't have the kind of auteurist credentials that you would expect of many of the really famous French filmmakers. And as a result, The Hole kind of feels like it got a little ignored in the 1950s, 1960s, like French interest in French filmmaking, especially because like.
Yeah, it's still kind of ignored. It's like, I think I only heard about this film because of some old Letterboxd mutual from 2017. I mean, it's part of the Criterion collection, so it's not like this like deeply, deeply underseen classic or whatever, but it has been slept on a lot. It doesn't have like the huge cult of personality, and it's really ripe for rediscovery. It's one of those films that I mostly wanted to talk about it because I do have a ton to say about A Wages of Fear, and I do have a ton to say about this, but I have a little less to say. I didn't even take any notes on this one. I was just kind of sitting in awe once again. But this is like
interesting, like just because of some of the sequences. At a certain point, you're like, and they're filing a bar. And you just watch that for like 4 minutes. And I don't mean that as an insult. It's fantastic. But taking notes at a certain point was just like, if I'm just doing kind of what they're doing on screen, you can sit there for 3 minutes at a time,
Yeah, no. And which is a shame because this is like, to me, and I almost never say this, but this to me is like a perfect movie. This is just this immaculate, like, nexus between, you've got this very almost pulpy concept of a real world prison escape, but then it's mashed with this documentary style, almost like avant-garde level of procedural detail, and the two just heighten each other. The two just make each other more exciting, like all of the long shots of concrete being pummeled and bars being filed down, just like they heighten the suspense and the tension. And, that in turn makes the melodrama, like especially near the end, like that all the more intense and emotional. It's been compared a lot to A Man Escaped, and like a lot of Bresson films, it keeps its cards pretty close to its chest. And it's like, no, this is a kind of stone-faced film about a process, and it's just showing things somewhat matter-of-factly. And then the sort of angle, the emotional angle. In Bresson's case, it's more the spiritual angle with A Man Escaped. But in this one, it's the more melodramatic angle, just explodes at a few points. And I don't know, it's... God, like, I really just cannot praise this film enough. I really do think that if we as cinephiles or whatever, we do our duty, this will be on the next Sight and Sound ballot, because this is a film that really, really needs some fucking more love than it has.
Let's do it. And also there's a neat connection I read in reading up on Becker, by the way, because basically he was the son of this wealthy businessman in France. He apparently didn't give a shit at all about his dad's business, and basically just used his wealth to become friends with Jean Renoir. So that's why he was like his assistant. Like he just like bought sports cars with him and like went to like concerts with him and shit like that, basically. And so that's why he ended up becoming friends and being in The Grand Illusion, A Day in the Country. But his story got a bit more interesting reading about him during the outbreak of World War II, like for probably most French filmmakers. He briefly served as a prisoner of war in occupied France for something like a year. So he actually did experience jail time. And so that was partially, I think, why this kind of does come across to a lot of people as, like the kind of personal film that he wanted to make at some point in his career. But also when he got out of prison, that was when he decided to actually become a director. So he had not directed a film prior to being locked up in prison in World War II. Then he got out and decided to be, he made everything from crime films to war films to comedies. He would basically make anything the French industry would let him make. And around the same time, this is when Clouzot made Le Corbeau, which is why I kind of emphasized it in the last section a bit, and was banned from filmmaking in France. And Becker was one of the people leading the charge to get Clouzot unbanned. To be like, he shouldn't have, like, Corbeau was a great movie. He's not a Nazi. Like, we should actually bring him back and let him make movies again in France. So, there might be, Clouzot maybe owes a little bit to Becker on that one, because there are obviously a bunch of filmmakers as well. But yeah, Becker was also friends and mentors to Jean-Pierre Melville, Godard, Truffaut, all of these guys, and his career just like never took. Yeah, there was articles you could find of like Godard, or maybe it was Truffaut, calling him like Uncle Jacques or something like that. Like it was one of those things where like all these guys kind of knew this guy. He was, by the time the French New Wave was rolling around, he was like an old guard filmmaker who had been in the industry for a while and kind of gave them notes and all that kind of stuff. And he struggled in a series of commercial productions that as the people kind of write about. Apparently, I haven't seen them. His heart wasn't in some of them in the 1950s, and he wasn't having a great time making them. And so the whole was meant to be the thing he had a personal connection to. And, you can tell that, in terms of filmmaking, it feels like his heart and soul is kind of in it. And yeah, he died 2 weeks before it eventually got released, and would give him the most acclaim of his entire career.
Doesn't that always happen?
Kind of a little, that does seem to happen, but it's one of those things where it's like, man, I do wonder if he would have had another 10 to 20 years of like, if the level of acclaim he would have got for this would have made, maybe he would have been more of an auteur staple if he got to keep making movies through the entire 60s and 70s. I don't know. It's just one of those things that, it felt like he kind of blew up with his personal film, and, didn't get to kind of take it any further than that. But yeah,
have you seen any other movies from him? Just out of curiosity.
No, this is my first one. But I mean, this made me incredibly curious. I'm like, The Craft is amazing. I'm assuming there has to be other ones where even the commercial Craft's good.
Yeah, I haven't seen any either, and it's literally because I'm afraid to. Like, I love this movie so much that I'm like, worried. Like I don't want to like if I don't like them, I don't want to sully how much I love this film. It's a very irrational fear, but it's been so long and I'm still like, nope, I've just got this one. This is all I need.
No, I mean he's got some ones from the 50s here that I see a couple friends are definitely, fighting for. So I'm definitely gonna go down the rabbit hole. I'm gonna go check them out after. But as Spencer mentioned, like the point of reference here is Robert Bresson's A Man Escaped, which actually came out right in the middle between these two films in 1956, and is obviously the most famous example among cinephiles of a French prison escape movie, like literally. And also he does deploy some of Bresson's like aesthetic techniques. Like this is a very stripped down, very minimalist choice of location. Once again, there's basically no score. There's no credit sequence to this movie. Use of non-actors, something Bresson used to do all of the time. And as Spencer mentioned, where Bresson would kind of approach this more from a spiritual transcendence or kind of abstraction kind of perspective, this one is definitely more baked into the concrete material world. And
even having the character introduce the film going, this is a true story, this is what happened basically beat for beat.
This is biographical and it is the guy.
And I was a part of it. It's what's really interesting, just specifically on I guess he's credited Jean Carodi.
He was credited under a pseudonym because they were scared of like maybe
his
people
past.
looking into his backstory or anything like that, right? So,
he has a very just natural screen presence, which was really cool.
He's got a great face. I liked him. I thought he was a good actor.
I kind of forgot that he was the guy in the introduction as the film went on, and he's got some great moments where he's got like some close up lines, and I thought he was delivering. It was really cool to find out that he's just a ex prisoner.
Yeah, no, he gets the best line in the entire movie, which we'll get to at the end. But something that's very I don't love the Bresson comparisons, even though they're just right there. Like they're so easy to make. Like they're just.
Well, I mean, also Robert Bresson, cinematographer for O Hazard Balthazar, shot this movie as well, right? So it's one of those things.
Yeah. No, it's again, it's like just a piece of like raw meat that you're leaving on the table and the dog's around. Like it's hard not to do. But the one little difference. So Bresson's non-actors, like you can tell, and this isn't a knock against him, obviously, but like you can often tell in his movies that these are non-actors, and they're being used as models essentially, and he's trying to make you think and make you like ponder. The non-actors here all give insanely good performances, and I'm still shocked that they're not actors because. All of them, these are the type of people street casters would fucking kill themselves to find, because every single one of these guys could have been like a movie star or like at least a character actor. It's insane how good they all
my
are.
girlfriend walked in while I was watching this at one point. She was like, dude, look at these beefcakes. Like, look at them. Like they're all just hanging out, eating food, shirtless for some of it, like it was like, it was one of those things where like they are all, and they are giving good performances of this kind of bonding experience. And like, the glances they make when they're trying to kind of suss each other out and feel each other out. And, who's going to push the next person with the next tool, this kind of stuff. Like, it's one of those things where this is dramatized, and the main, other point of, where this diverges hugely from Bresson, in my opinion, is that, like this has a lot of, sort of like gritty immediacy that you would find more in like an American thriller. And the dramatics of it is more of an American thriller, where like a Bresson character would be going through some kind of moral, sort of spiritual sensation through liberation and through light coming through a piece of concrete or something. This is more of an example of the dramatics are more grounded in like these characters are making decisions, they are cooperating, they are doing a job, they have interests, they have goals, and it's very direct and it's very tough, and they're in a harsh environment. And this reminds me a lot more, and I think what kind of cribs a lot more from it which is basically the exact center between A Man Escaped and this movie, is the Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood Escape from Alcatraz. Like Escape from Alcatraz seems to be just like kind of whole ripping this right off. Like they even do the exact same strategies of like, you know, the guys having to duck the nightly guards and having to, you know, dig a hole through the prison and, you know, get a little bit further each night and see how far they can kind of push it, that kind of stuff. Like it's almost like exactly the same. And the fact that this was like basically right down to its detail, because not only is the main or one of the main guys basically one of the actual escapees or attempted escapees. There's also two other consultants on the film who were the other parts of the crew who were off camera and making sure that they actually got the details of like the production design of the prison correct, and that they got every detail of like the work that they're doing, which is why when you get to the actual work that they're doing and the labor that they're doing, it is like like on some level, yeah, you are watching minutes of a guy doing a mundane task that you wouldn't want to be doing. On the other hand, you're like, this is how it would fucking have to be done. Yeah. And it's kind of incredible to see that. Like there is, Spencer used at the very top of the show the word purity. And that was exactly what I felt when I was watching this. Like there is a sense of just like, wow, there's something amazing to seeing something this authentic to the point that it almost does feel experimental or avant-garde. And I was blown away by this.
And the famous shot, the famous one is when the initial break through the concrete floor of the prison. And
I timed it 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Long take. Yeah, eat your fucking heart out, Alfonso Cuarón. Yeah, no. Yeah. They no, I mean the reason why they get away with it too is because it's such a fucking tense situation where they have this window where they realize, okay, we have to do this, but at any point someone catches us, we're fucked. Like, there's no way we could cover this up. There's no contingency plans. We just got to do this.
There would be no way to clean it in time. Like, we're going to start and we're just going to do it. And, you know, and that's the sensation you get from the shot of you have to see this through. There's no cutting away. There's no escape from it. It's like, no, you're in this shot until the job's done. You know, that's it.
Yeah. There's something incredibly intriguing about watching the little progress that they make and then them having to constantly, based on that little progress they make, reverse back so that, you know, they can cover it up in case a guard does come in. And it's just interesting because the deeper and deeper that they go into the escape, the more they actually have to revert back to in their plan. And he focuses on that every single time, whether it just be, you know, that like we were just talking about, that 4 minute of the cement breaking and then they cover it back up, or when they start to get into the tunnel and they have the whole sequence where they're, you know, getting the hinges off of the door, but then they realize that they have to go back to the prisoners because the time is running out. And instead of just, you know, cutting back to the room when they go through the hole again or fading or something like that, they show them putting the hinges back on the door, going through the same situation they just went in the previous room, going through the tunnel again, going up, putting the cardboard back over the hole, like. And they do that every single time just to emphasize how much work it takes.
There is something satisfyingly repetitive that works for my brain specifically, where I'm just like, man, there's something about it. Just it ticks boxes for me. It makes me happy.
It accumulates detail. No. And I also want to say, like, speaking of great log lines, like the setup for this movie is just phenomenal too. Like,
I was going to say we should mention, I guess, since this is the less popular one, everyone knows the premise of Wages of Fear at this point. But there is a premise for this that I do think is actually really fucking good. I agree. Where it's this guy, Claude Gaspard, played by Mark Michel, who is this very polite upper class, sort of like a new prisoner transfer being moved due to construction happening in his block, and who were introduced to getting a lighter that has some sentimental value to him taken away by his prison supervisors. But it's done in the set piece that for another movie would be like a really tense, and it would be where the American prison character would like assert his like male dominance, and he'd be like, "Ha, no, it's my thing." But in this, it's actually this very French, very satisfied, like everyone is kind of nice to one another and understanding about it. He just made a mistake. Don't worry, we'll take care of this. Or there's no greedy guard who's like, oh, I'm going to pocket that shit or something. You know, it's like, it is just like this, you know, there's this overall politeness to it and friendliness to it. And I definitely thought it was like an odd detail, which definitely makes its way through into the rest of the film, because so much of this film is actually about friendship and social bonds and maybe the presentation of it versus, like presentation of it versus the real thing on a certain level is maybe the key to the film. But he's shown to his new room where he is immediately, brought into the crew, where there's this guy named Vosselin, played by Raymond Munier, Roland Darbont, who is the guy actually Roland, who is the actual attempted prison escapee, Gio Cassid, played by Michelle Constantin, and Manu, played by Philip Leroy. And all of these guys have a more stern, joking, kind of prickly relationship with the guards, where they give them questions and pushback about, like throwing a new guy into their room despite the lack of space, or a mattress, and giving them shit about the quality of the soup and the soup trolley, and you know, all these kinds of things. And they've also, there's a weird atmosphere among them. They want to do a lot of work because they can get paid in the French prison, I guess, to like do labor and turn these cardboard slabs into boxes, which they've turned into like a little bit of a ritual that they do to make money so they can have nicer food, and then they share all their food in their place. And it's funny that
I was just real briefly, I love the detail that it's kind of like they've become accustomed to it, and one of them says that they're starting to like it a little bit, like they're enjoying the procedure, and obviously it relates to what they're going to do. That's the experience
of the fucking movie, man.
Exactly.
Like, oh man, I'm beginning to like watching this labor go down, But one of the funniest things is just that, like, it doesn't actually seem like, necessarily like the worst, lifestyle for a prisoner. Like, again, it's not exaggerated to a ridiculous degree. Like, they're cramped in concrete. There is something to be said about, how the guards kind of treat them inhumanely or everything like that. And
it's mostly
but
the
like
fear
by prison
of the
standards, like these guys are wearing normal outside clothes. They're drinking coffee and biscuits, in the morning. They get paid for the work. It's not like slave labor.
It's a voluntary too.
Yeah, and it's if you don't want to, you could just pass and say that you don't want the money.
It's mostly their fear of like where the future is going to lead, and just that desperation. Because I think a couple of them have the risk of being dead. I think there is a risk of. I think two of them they're like on death row technically, or have a risk of being killed in some way. I can't remember how they say it, but. Yeah, especially compared to,
does France have the death penalty? I think it's just lifetime sentences that they're just worried about having to be stuck in being sentenced to like 20 or 25 years or something like that.
Got you.
Yeah, no, it's a jail, I think, not a prison, where like they're all being held there because they're like accused of crimes and have charges against them, but most of them are waiting verdicts. So that's probably why it's not like sheer hell on earth, basically. Like they're just waiting.
That's really where the fear is, because everyone has just the potential of that, I guess, and they're just kind of like they don't want to risk the time that they have versus the time that they could end up in jail. So But one of my favorite concepts of this is that we don't know that when we first meet them for quite a while. Mm-hmm. Like he just gets introduced to the room. Here's a bunch of guys, and now he's hanging out with these guys, and some of them are kind of nice and receptive to him. Some of them are a little weird to him. He's picking up like a strange vibe that they talk a bit like they don't entirely mean what they're saying, or how friendly they are about their guests, or he feels immediately like an intruder, and he doesn't totally understand why. And when he leaves the room for a package of food coming from someone giving to him from the outside, where we also watch the guard procedurally cut through every piece of fucking like meat and cheese and fucking soup and everything, like they're fucking looking for illegal shit snuck into it. With as much detail, and we find out like eventually the escape too. Like it really is
exactly.
They cut in every single sausage, every single piece of bread, and they show every detail of that.
Yes.
Yeah, and
teaching you how to watch
we
the
find
movie.
out that they're all working on an escape plan, and basically have to either put it on pause while he's in the room, like effectively stomping it out because they don't know if they can trust him, or they let him in on it and they hope he's into it and that he's not a rat. And like that's like kind of like the dichotomy. I love that the one deciding factor is like how long his potential sentence is. So they have to like grill his story out of him, where they're like, how he slept with his wife's sister, and his wife pulled a shotgun on him, and he tried to like smack it out of her arms, and it went off and hit her shoulder, and now she's claiming attempted first degree murder because he's a little bit he comes from money but not as much money as her. And so they're like, oh dude, that's bad, man, that's like 20 years hard labor, that you're gonna get in shit for that if she doesn't and so then they're able to convince him. They were like, we actually are going to dig our way out of this, and we are just about to start, and if you want in, we'll let you in the same way that we're going to share everything in this room with you, the way we're going to share the blankets, the beds, the food. And there's actually one full long minute of them just like eating in silence together and just hanging out and just bros.
Yeah, how come Studio Ghibli food looks so good? No, that food does look pretty tasty though. They've got like smoked sausage and like rice pudding and stuff like that. That looks good as hell. Let me in jail. I want to eat some of that. And then there's that great moment. Like that could have been, I don't know. They could have stretched. I mean, everything in this movie. This could have been like a 9-hour long movie, but like that initial like log line or whatever gets resolved pretty quickly, although not truly resolved. But they figure out like, okay, this guy's on the level. We'll let him in. And then comes the agonizing 4-minute sequence of busting concrete, although not without tons of little moments where a character will like procure an item and then you're kind of left wondering for like a few minutes. What's he doing? Like they have a little piece of like mirror. He smashes it. And you're left wondering for like 2 minutes until he uses it as like a little viewport out of the prison.
Well, because the movie comes up with these great situations where we're watching someone, and obviously the sort of the dramatics of what we're seeing visually is you're like, oh, why did he do that? And you're trying to figure out like what he's going to do. But then they'll place really strategically like great moments of interrupting that process, because like when he breaks that mirror, he's about to start making what he's making, but then suddenly they get room checked. And we get the dehumanizing experience of them rummaging in and throwing all their fucking shit around, and at one point they have to throw all of the broken mirror shards into like a tablecloth and throw it into the toilet, and then when they get sent outside the room they actually pull the loose so that it goes all the way down, and then the guards are like, hey, who fucking did that? And they were like, yeah, I'm a jokester, I'm just joking out here, I'm just flushing the toilet, you know.
I've never done it from the outside before.
But meanwhile we know that they were actually flushing down the broken mirror, that the guards would have seen and been like, what the fuck are you using this for? And then after that scene is over is when we actually watch him lodge it to the toothbrush, and we realize that they're forming like a spy glass that they can poke through the little eye hole, and they can check the directions for when guards are coming in like that, which then leads to, throughout the entire film, these great point of view shots from the perspective of the mirror, almost like it's a rear view window in a car, where they are constantly using it throughout to be like, you know, again, the metronome effect of them ripping through the floor and then cutting, you know, sometimes to the guy who is like, you know, well, not in the one where it doesn't cut at all, but you know what I mean? In other sequences where they're watching someone do something and they're basically like, sometimes we'll go back to just this guy's eye in the mirror, just being like, oh my God, is there a guard who can hear this shit? But also these guards can't hear shit, I'll be honest. I don't think these guards hear a single thing in this whole movie.
It's covered up because there's construction going on in the jail. That's why they have to do it during the day, which heightens the tension even further.
Yeah, and I do like the emphasis that, like, they do a lot of focus, obviously, on the people that are, you know, filing down the bars and taking the hinges off and everything. But I do like that they emphasize, too, cutting back to the people that are just watching the guards, because that is truly equally as important. Because if they're caught, that's it. It doesn't matter how deep they get. And as much as it is just like, you know, cut back to an eyeball and then the reflection of the guards, it's a really important kind of teamwork aspect that they let you know about throughout the entire thing, and I think it's really great to emphasize.
Yeah, I mean the level of resourcefulness that is depicted in this in terms of like actual cooperation and work that they pull off. I mean, you can tell that it's authentic.
Every character is important
because like. Because this guy lived it, and he actually is like, these are what people had to do under these conditions. These are how clever they can kind of be. One of my favorite ones was when they're trying to trade communications through the various cells, and they're receiving packages from one another with rope and hand brooms that they stick their arms out the back of like the cell bars through the windows. And they literally throw rope over, and they were like, hey, dude in the middle cell, can we use your arms so that we can actually like create a little string that goes across from our cell to the next one? Yeah. And then they use it like a little gondola to like send an actual package over to the guys over there.
Yes. And also like the fact that they don't really give a lot of these characters too much of a background, so it doesn't come off like, you know, one had a background in engineering or something like that. It really just come off as just five average people that are in jail trying their best to come up with a solution to get out of it. And
it's just simple ingenuity and resistance, you know?
Yeah. And it's cool, like you said, I love all the things where they break apart something, and for sometimes like 10 minutes at a time, you don't really know how they're going to use it as a tool, because they have to, a lot of the time, whether they're breaking something off or they have to form it into the tool that they're going to use, which also takes time. It's amazing how much focus there is on every little detail.
Well, you can also tell that's why they also gave it to Roland, because Roland actually has made these things in his actual life. So right, that's one of those things where like the mix of trying to do this almost like arty slow cinema type process thing where like that could go wrong. I think that there's a version of this movie where that actually does go wrong and you just kind of actually lose some of that tension. Yeah, but there's something about it being so painstaking in its procedure, like watching an actual expert's hands do the various things that they're doing, pull the wooden floor planks out, and there's something do the hammering with like the makeshift wrench and everything.
Yeah, there's something also about seeing the progress, like when you see a fully done wall, no damage, and then in the next 3 minutes it's going to be completely destroyed and you're going to watch that in real time. There is something kind of fascinating about that.
There's also like Becker's very smart in that all the scenes where he pulls like the slow cinema stuff is in scenes where there's like heightened danger, basically.
Yeah, totally.
And it again, for your consideration, maybe best scene in cinema history when they descend initially into the tunnels underneath and you just get these insane inky blacks as the candle lights up the square tunnels around them. And then there's all these moments where they have to do this stuff, but they also have to keep a watch out for guards. Like there's a almost like comic moment where they're like there's guards patrolling around. They have to stand on top of each other to hide from them.
Yeah, they almost have to do like the kids on top of each other's shoulders under a trench coat.
Deal. Yeah, no. And again, like every single time they do this, they make the reason why he's so exacting, it's in part to show like the labor that's required for this, but it's also just because this is a stressful situation. And when you're in this, the seconds creep by like hours. And it's always very smart that all of these very arduous, slow cinema things only happen in the tunnel itself.
Yeah, that was actually a line I didn't bring up in Wages of Fear that I wanted to mention. There's actually a character who says that when they're waiting for the hour before they're about to go on their mission. He's like, man, an hour can feel like a long time. Yeah. And that's exactly what this does when it is taking this almost like a documentary approach to these characters. Like, breaking a hole in the floor, and it takes on this very like hypnotic, tactile ritual quality where the exertion and effort and anxiety kind of all blend together kind of agonizingly, and like that that's why the mundaneness does actually contribute to it, because it is like it's effort. You need this isn't something you just it would be a worse movie to be like and then they just they did a hole and it was really easy. It's like, no, it's fucking hard work and you have to commit to it despite the fact of the danger it's going to put you through, like in that that's why that unbroken long take of them getting that first hole through is like so incredible. But that same mentality even seeps in as he doesn't do unbroken takes, even stuff as simple as like figuring out how they're going to cover the hole using the giant pile of boxes, or turning some of the boxes into shapes of their sleeping bodies under the blankets, which then they use twine to make move at night, so that during the guard peephole checks on their room it can look like all of them are sleeping under their beds, but two of them are actually in the hole doing the underground tunnel passageway, which is maybe the most visually astonishing like section of the film, and where and where the camera actually starts to move a little bit more, because like when he's first filing through that bar, the crazy fucking tilts he does in that, where it's like and you're watching a close-up of the file just going, and then he'll stop for a second because he thinks he hears something, and the tilt will move with his paranoid glance, and then back to his hands actually doing the labor. And it's just the way the camera just gracefully starts moving with the logic and the mechanism of it, speeding up occasionally with the intensity or the riskiness of whatever move they're pulling off. Like it's really well done.
And then focusing too on the file of the bar and how slow it takes, and having constantly back and forth, like you said, with the tilt. But then they also do a fade to show you the progress that he's made. And a fade obviously implies like a significant amount of time. And he's only made like probably a quarter of an inch of like space that he's still filing down. Just emphasizes how much effort this takes. And I also like the scenes where, you know, as they progress deeper into the tunnels, there's more surprises because they don't exactly know the layout. They know a little bit, but they're not exactly sure where certain cement walls are. And so even that sequence when they get back down into the tunnel and then use that little lighter, there's this awesome camera shot where they just follow them throughout into the darkness, and eventually they stumble onto a door.
The tracking shot where you can't see what's like in front of them.
Yeah, and it's like and eventually they stumble onto a door, but for a while they're just walking, and it feels like they're as aimlessly walking as we are. Like we just don't know where this is leading, but we're hoping it leads to the next solution, you know?
Well, yeah, and there's even a part right before that where in the dirt, he actually draws out a thing where he's like, so here's these areas and here's these areas, and we're going to walk these little tunnels and just hope we don't run into a person and hope at some point we find where the sewer is or where it connects to. Yeah. He's like, that's all we're doing. And like, yeah, it is committing to walking through this like shadowy void like tunnel that you don't know what's on the other side. And again, that takes to have the camera track through that is creepy visually, but also it does depict the experience of you are deciding to do that, despite the fact that like everything in your being probably screams, that's not a good idea. You know, these like underground tunnel passageways, we don't know we do know what's in here. It's guards taking smoke breaks and also, you know, probably looking for people to fuck with. So like, you know, they're in a bad situation, having to narrowly duck out of the way, or some of them, or walking these endless halls like they're like Zelda levels or something, looking for doors. And like, you know, there is something like you know, and even that long shot of the tunnel too, where the only light is the candle, and the architectural framing of it almost looks like a shot out of like Night of the Hunter or something. It's beautiful, this section of the movie, the whole gradual descent into actually locating the sewer, of course, by one of the real guys who actually did all of this. Like, so it's just like that's a thing that can't be like understated, because it is just like so surreal to have the real guy there to walk you through. He's like, yeah, so back when I was in this other prison, I this is what I did, and then I found this door and I took the hinges off and I marked my place so I knew how to get back, and we had to crawl back up through the hole, shoving the dummies out of the bed before the guards get back in the morning, which is one of the most tense moments, because they're like, yeah, we didn't have watches, so we actually weren't paying attention to how long we were down there for, which then results in them having to create like a makeshift hourglass so they can actually mark the hours the next time they go down and actually, you know, make it up by morning and not get caught.
Again,
there's some crazy detail like that.
A great little scene where one of the prisoners, he like steals a pocket full of sand, and you're like, why the fuck would you ever do that? And then when you say what, and then you see it, you're like, oh right, they're making a little stopwatch or whatever, or like a little hourglass. That's so sick. So much of the movie is just this exacting process, and again, it's almost a sick joke that they get all the way down to the sewers, and then there's a concrete wall and they have to tunnel around it. They have to spend days just tunneling around concrete. So after they dig the first hole, they got to dig the second hole.
Yeah. There are these, like, most of it is the procedural stuff, and I love that. I do like that he sprinkles in a couple almost, they're not surreal by any means, but almost creepy moments. Like there's one where it shows the close-up of a spider, and then it shows a guard's face, like really close up, and you can't actually see his mouth, but he does this smile, and there's something about his eyes and the glare that they do in the close-up that's like just creepy, and like he's it's I think showing the guards is kind of inhumane a little bit. I think he does something to the spider at the time, but just the way that he presents them in that shot is creepy as hell.
Yeah, that's definitely the presence they have. And one of the things that I like is that, like, obviously, like, that's the kind of, you know, the broad force they represent. Yeah. Sort of, you know, to the characters. But one of the details I actually kind of liked about this is, like, for what is a lot of non-actors, there's a lot of, like, kind of just, like, funny dialogue and conversational stuff that some of them that they even have with the guards. Like, one of my One of the sequences where it kind of clarified what the movie was doing to me a bit was when their faucet breaks and they need to like waste a day calling guards, having plumbers come in, because there was some real personality to the dialogue when like that one guard comes in and he's just, and it's Gio, who is like the guy who's, you know, kind of really chill. And he's constantly, he's the one who doesn't want to work. He just wants to like sleep all day. And some of the guards crack jokes about how he's like lazy. And the one guy comes in and said, that guy didn't commit suicide, did he? Because Gio's like hasn't acknowledged the guard's existence in the room yet. Like he hasn't shown him respect yet. And then he just leans over and he goes, you know, we know better than that, boss. Not when you're on duty. You know, like we kind of like you, you know, like I wouldn't do that to you. And there's something about the way that they are doing that playfully and also like, you know, also doing it as a form of resistance, a little bit of cool hand Luke, I guess you could say, in little moments like that. But then also it like leans into some of the, you know, the actual humane flaws of these characters, like when the plumbers steal their cigarettes and stamps. Right. So they call the head of the block to like bring them back in, and in typical French fashion, they just like slap and spank the shit out of these guys to get their shit back. I was gonna say, this is the most French ass fighting of all time
I've ever seen in my life. There's actually a shot where the guy just slaps him back and forth, I think 10 times, all in one shot, and I was howling. I thought it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. In a great way. But
it also emphasizes the childishness of it, right? Because the one guy goes like, "Why would you do that? Like, we're gonna break out in a couple days and have all the cigarettes and stamps we fucking want. Like, why would you draw attention to our room and bring the guards into our room?" But it's like it's a point of, you know, they were like, well, they broke a friendly social contract, and that's not right. You know, that they're not allowed to. There's a betrayal in the group, and it was one of those things where I was kind of like, it's interesting how much time the movie's spending on this, and then you get to the very end of the movie and you're like, oh, okay, I understand.
It's a movie. It's almost like a subtle fake out, since like so much, almost I'd say like 90% of this movie by volume is just like hard labor, and or like maybe these men talking about the hard labor, and then the remaining 10%, the really only dramatic beats in the entire movie. The first one is Gio, who is a very charming, funny prisoner who is kind of like the Eeyore of the group. And he's always, you know, he's the most like deadpan or whatever. And he says, "I'm not escaping with you guys. Like, I'll help you all out, but I'm not going to escape with you all, because if I run away, they'll go to my mom again and she will have a heart attack and die. So I'm just going to stay behind." And
which is actually kind of adorable when he says that. And also, like, if we're talking, by the time we do get to the end, like, that is such the philosophical difference of the film, is like, here's a guy who is like, yeah, I'll do the work and I'm part of this social contract with all of you because I like you all. And he's willing to do this insane amount of like hellish labor and like not actually get anything out of it. Like, he's not going to be escaping. He's just doing it purely for them. It's like a completely selfless act, which then makes it more harrowing, like the scene when, you know, Gio is the one who's going down with Roland at one point, and because Gio is the one who almost gets crushed digging, right?
Yeah,
and has to dig him out.
Horrifying scene. The first time I saw it, I thought he just straight up died there. But yeah,
me too. I was actually like, how long is he going to have to dig this guy out of here? It was horrifying, and obviously building to that climactic shot of his the hands in the rubble, actually, you know, like embracing, and it does have this like dirty, you know, texture, but it's like the one of the few like openly romantic moments of the film, of these bonding of like, here's the guy who knows his shit, and here he is grabbing his hand and pulling him out. He's like, I'm not letting this guy die. We're in this, you know, we're in this together. And here was the guy's only in trouble because he's selflessly trying to help us out. Like, it's a really beautiful moment.
Yeah. And the other little melodramatic aspect of the movie that provides the whole fulcrum, like the emotional fulcrum of it, is Gaspard, you know, the charges against him, there's some ambiguity at first as to whether or not he's just got a convenient, like, lying, like, oh, this guy tried to kill his wife. But we do figure out that, no, this guy is genuinely, like, he's a scumbag and he cheated on his wife. But as a matter of fact, his story is true, and that the charges are going to be dropped. And at first he doesn't believe it. And he's like, whatever, who gives a shit? And then,
well, yeah, because at first it's the sister-in-law, like the woman he actually slept with, arrives to the prison and is like, hey, I think she'll drop the charges if like I go away to England for like a year and I can just wait for you, and you know she'll drop the charges and you can get out, and you know that's all fine, and maybe you won't be facing as like bleak of charges as you think you are, you know, that kind of deal. And yeah, it's framed in that amazing bit like through the actual like prison like, you know, fencing bar there a little bit where he's just like, yeah, I don't give a shit, fuck you, partially because I do think partially because I think he does feel a sense of camaraderie with these guys a little bit. There is that part when they're breaking through with the metal rods, and it is actually the labor is bringing them closer together. And I think he looks at Manu or whatever, and he's like, you know, this is the first time in my life that I feel right. Like it is genuinely, like it is great being with you guys. Yeah. And he totally means that. He's like, there is a spiritual connection forming between these guys by, you know, being in the shit together and doing the work together. And so the images obviously have been generating that in the audience. You share in this experience with them. And so I think it's cool that the first sign of temptation, he kind of is like, nah, you know, I don't believe you. And, you know, I'm going to go back to hanging out with the fellas, you know, that's his first cue. But then when he's brought in again later, it's a whole nother story.
Yeah, no, the warden tells him, like, the warden says charges are going to be dropped. And then he looks nervous and the warden's like, you don't seem too happy about that. And then the scariest fade out in movie history.
Yeah.
And then it fucks with your head too, because then he comes back and he gives an insanely plausible cover story. Like something like,
yes,
you know, he gives a very, very plausible one. And he says like, I was grilled. I like you guys. Okay. I got fucking grilled. I put myself out there for you all. I would never betray you. You all are my friends. And, you know.
And you want to believe him even in that moment.
Yeah, you want to believe him.
Do you know what? I'll admit it. I believed him. 100%.
Yeah.
I 100%. I don't know if it was the performance or like, it's like after the fact, it seems so obvious.
Yeah.
But in the moment, 100% in that scene, I was like, oh yeah, that's totally believable, because, you know, he has been having this sort of like friendly relationship with the warden. So there's no reason that he's like uniquely snuggling up to him or anything like that. It was just like a basic, you know, sort of, jovial sort of relationship where like there's that scene obviously with the lighter. There's one in the middle of the film where he mistakenly goes back to his old cell and not his new cell, and he, you know, he explains that to the warden at one point too, and the warden's like, you know what, you're a nice educated guy. I actually like interacting with you in my prison, and I've looked into your case, and I think that you're going to be okay, and the charges are going to be dropped. And when he goes back to the cell, he's like, you know, after 2 hours, by the way, too, which is why they're so suspicious, because they should be, like, absolutely. Yeah. But he was basically like, look, I actually don't think that he offered me that good of a deal. And, you know, it was just, you know, like, I don't think that the charges are actually going to get dropped in as cleanly a fashion as he says, and I don't think that the magistrate is going to be as friendly to me as he thinks that I am, and I think he's wrong, and I think I still serve a lot of years, so I'm totally here with you. And also, he does just openly play the friend card. Yes. He's like, I thought you guys were my friends, and I was your friends. I thought we achieved some kind of connection with one another through all of these things that we're doing. Which, by the way, I will say my favorite example of that connection is that one where Gio and Roland eventually do make it through the sewer, which takes so many painstaking scenes of them ripping through that fucking concrete over and over again until they eventually make it into the sewer. They get up to a manhole, and it's one of my favorite moments in the whole film because, first of all, the subterranean passages made me think of something like The Third Man, which is obviously something like where it's more imposing. It's like the sewers are going to swallow you. It's like you're through the intestines of the city. You're in a bleak place. When they open that manhole and they get the long shots of them poking their heads out, and it's just this beautiful moment of like just observing the sounds, the diegetic sounds of the street, and it's like so beautiful. Look at this taxi going by at 6 a.m. Look at the wind. Yeah. Oh my God! Like they're freaking out about this moment of freedom. And one of them jokingly suggests, hey, we should just hail that cab down. And
it's Gaspard.
Let's get out.
Yeah. It's Gaspard who says, let's take a taxi. And it's like,
Yeah. Yes. And then he goes, no, we have to go and tell the guys that we've made it. And we're all going to freedom. Like, again, it's this pure act of selflessness to be like, I could just jump out of the manhole right now. We've made it. or I could go back and I could go tell them all, and it's an act of selflessness that does end up dooming him. But it's one of those things where, again, the instinct, even at the relief point, is to be like, I'm going to go back into hell in order to, get this feeling for my friends as well.
I think, I really think Gaspard is a much more complicated character than he especially initially presents himself. Because even with the warden, he's got that reputation of like, oh, you're just a nice guy, you're just a nice guy. But then as these things go on, there's more complications. Like even in that moment when he suggests to go into the taxi, that is a hint that, of maybe what's to come from his character. But at the same time, he still does choose to go back with them and tell the prisoners about, the progress that they've made. He easily could have hopped out real fast, jumped in the taxi, and just fucking left. So there was something still in him that was like, okay, there's still a camaraderie here, there's friendship. But I think it just, it unfortunately... It weighs on him too much.
It changes when he's offered a personal convenience. And the thing, maybe you don't have to serve as long of a sentence, and maybe you don't need to escape at all, right? Because that's the only reason. That was why they first grilled him at the very beginning.
Right.
It was like, you're facing a long sentence. The risk is worth it to you based on how much time you'll save by breaking out. But now it's like, is he saving time by breaking out, or should he just serve a year in solitary? And his wife drops the charges, or anything like that. So,
and even the warden,
that is what eventually motivates the final sequence of the film, where they do suddenly get betrayed. And man, what a visual way to depict that!
What an ending, man!
It's so sudden and brutal. How they think they're in the middle of the escape. They're all dressed under the blankets. They watch for the guards with the mirror. They think they're about to go down and go do it. And again, the way that we did it with Wages of Fear, where there's a repetition to it, we've gone into that hole so many times, the titular hole, that it's like, well, yeah, all they have to do is sink into the hole and they're out the manhole. They're good. Like, your brain has already done the connecting for you, the logic of their thought process on how this would go down. And the fact that it's like disrupted, but they don't even get in it before they poke the little fucking mirror through the peephole to check on the guards, and there's no guards, and then they check it again. 100 guards just standing there watching them, and that image is just so incredible when they...
So terrifying.
Yeah,
and then they rush them, they just storm them, and it's just sheer chaos for about a minute. Like, they are just... One of them tries to fucking just strangle Gaspard, and there's just like an outright brawl with all of them happening. And then eventually, all of a sudden, they
strip all of their clothes, but let Gaspard stay dressed all fancy, which is one of my favorite details.
Yeah, they pin them up against the wall. It's silent and still again. And then, what is it? Roland just looks at him and just says, "Poor Gaspard," as he walks away over to solitary. And it's just one of the most...
He has no friends.
You've got no friends now. You've got, there's nothing
fake
there.
Friends, baby.
Yeah. No, you're getting out of here, but your soul is trapped forever. And it's such a grim and tragic and shocking ending for the movie, because again, it kind of comes out of nowhere. I mean, it's obvious in hindsight, but like, you think, oh, this is just a movie about escaping. This might as well be.
The movie totally fakes you out by showing you so much detailed process and getting you swept up in the process as a form of friendship and bonding and, experience with another human being that turns you into a collective of, and, the warmth that kind of comes from something that is otherwise so cold. The movie does so well at sweeping you up into that when someone breaks that fabric of what had been formed, you're like, dude, why would you even do that? And that's why that line does hit as hard as it does, because it's like, you sold your soul and you have no friends. And like, ultimately, did it not feel better hanging out with us, like eating food together, than, like what it's going to feel like alone with your wife that you don't even like, like it's this weird, man, what an ending.
And I love too the warden coming up, and it's the first time, except for the very beginning that you see him, which I do like, that the warden comes off as probably awful of a person as he actually is, and not just playing the game with Gaspard. Just being this like, I'm super cool, man. You can trust me. I'm a cool warden. Just tell me all the information. Tell me what's going on. At the beginning of it, when he's introduced, he is incredibly cruel to one of the opening inmates that we see. And then as soon as Gaspard enters in and he's got a kinder demeanor and whatever, he's very nice and cordial to him. And I think that's that initial hint of like, this is really what the warden is going to be like. It's all a deception. And then you slowly see Gaspard kind of, I wouldn't say trust him by any means, but seemingly not. He's at least a little more trustworthy towards the warden than the guards, it seems, for whatever reason by the end. I loved the warden walking up, and it's just like his cold eyes, like, I fucking got you. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. No. What a picture. Maybe if we are pivoting towards reductive rating round again on this one. This is the rare first time double watch, double five for me. It happens occasionally. I feel like the last time this happened, it was Perry when he brought the Cremator and Werkmeister Harmonies. I think was the last time that it was two films I hadn't seen before. And but no, this was a five for me. This was a huge surprise. Jacques Becker was someone I had this watch listed, but I hadn't heard much about him, and now I'm like, why haven't I? And why haven't I seen more? That's just, I think that's the logical response to the level of craft that's on display here. This is totally gripping, methodical. It's hypnotic. It's textured and tactile. Like, it's everything that you would want out of as Spencer's been pitching us here, a process thriller. But I was also surprised at like the amount of just like experimental documentary flourishes that it almost has to it as well, by being so rigorous and authentic with its depiction of labor and the bonding and the level of effort and feeling you get out of labor when you're trying to achieve a goal that you are aligned with other people in doing. And so it's one of those things where it doesn't make sense that you feel so much for the friendships in this film and the eventual betrayals in this film when you describe it to someone as probably like 75% someone with an object in their hand, like breaking a piece of steel or concrete. Like that, genuinely, that is like probably most of what you witness in this movie. And it's incredible that despite that, this does have a humanity and a warmth to it that is eventually bleakly betrayed. But man, I liked the scenes of these guys just hanging out in the prison, just like figuring out what it is they're gonna do, figuring out how, just watching a guy grab sand and being like, why the fuck are you grabbing sand, dude? And then this big smile on his face when he actually shows you why, and it's ingenious. He's gonna take these elements from the guy who was giving medicine and turn it into an hourglass, and then they're going to measure how much time the hourglass actually gives them. Then they're going to take the hourglass down with them into the tunnels, and then they can mark the hours with X's as they're doing their work and make it back up in time before the guards look through the peephole in the morning. And it's just like, to fit all of that information in as actually tight of a context as this ends up doing, and getting you psychologically involved in that as an audience member by, it takes a lot of careful, meticulous craft to do that. And Becker really pulls it off. And the only sad thing about watching this movie for me was I was going, man, this came at the very end of his career. And I do think if he had maybe got acclaim from this and was able to make more films in this vein, or more films that he wanted to make, that he might have taken off more. But also, I'm speaking a little bit from a place of ignorance, so I'm going to go back to his commercial 50 stuff and see if there's more in there as well. So, but yeah, this was like someone showing me a movie. Thank you, Spencer. I love it.
Yeah. This was. I mean, I think this is incredible. I think I am going to give it the old Jamie 4 TM, the classic rating here, just because I wanted I have a reason though, because next week we're doing.
I'm just kidding. I was if I could have, I would have thrown the like boo.
And I understand it. To be honest, I'm kind of booing myself right now. And if you want to put the 5 on the old Sleazoids podcast Letterboxd, you're more than welcome to do it, because I do feel like this is going to get there. Well, for me, I just wanted to watch. Years ago, I saw A Man Escaped for the first time, and just for obvious reasons, I was very much thinking about that the entire time. And since we're covering it next week, I just really want to watch it again and just kind of compare a little bit and see if I feel that both are in that realm. But I mean, it's an incredible movie. I'm not taking anything away from it. I think just the emphasis of the procedure is incredible. It's got to be like probably one of my top 10 at least favorite now procedural films, just because it never stops focusing on it. It is literally every single small detail is shown on camera, whether you think it'd be pointless to show or not. And what you realize too, just as the steps progress and they get deeper and deeper into the tunnel, every small detail is important, from just breaking up a small mirror and putting it in your mouth for a second while the guards are looking over your room so that you can turn it into a mirror and watch as all the activity is going on, and taking out like a piece of your metal bed frame so that you can use it as a thing to whack the cement with, and then putting it back. Like, it's just all these small details add up to an unbelievable suspense thriller. And like you were saying too, it's like 75% of the procedure. And so you wouldn't think that you get a lot out of the relationship stuff, but I think, emphasizing the work that they're putting in just makes those betrayals so much more impactful, because you've watched them go through all of this before it finally happens. So it really does.
Man, Gio was willing to break his arms for hours.
He was willing to suffocate himself.
Yes.
Yeah, for no personal gain.
Just for Claude to fuck it all up.
Yep, and I read Andrew Sarris's review of this too, and he was like, when he compared it to A Man Escaped, he was saying that this one's not a prison escape movie about liberty, it's about fraternity. And I think that actually clarified the entire thing for me, when I was like, man, like, you just, like, Gio is the guy. I'd want that guy on my side. He has honor. You know, and it's just it's crazy to see, to like, actually the movie does trick you. I think Spencer was right. The movie tricks you into watching it in a different way, but that is ultimately the feeling you get out of it, which is amazing. So, for you, Spencer.
I also do love how Gio is constantly just going like, "Is your wife good at sex? Is your wife good at sex? Is your mistress better? Is she a blonde brunette? Did you give sloppy? How's the pussy, bro? Do it be squirting? Do it be farting?"
The boy.
Yeah, no. Anyways, no, I mean, obvious, easy 5 for me. Like, Jesus Christ, this is like a top 4, top 5 of all time movie for me. This was, nice. I mean, this is like the single best, like, new discovery. Maybe like the single best first watch I've ever had in my life when I saw this during COVID. Like, I was just like, I don't think I've ever liked a movie as much on first watch as I've this one, since even my other favorites, like, they took me a couple of watches to get there with, but this one I was almost immediately like, oh, this is just like the best fucking thing I've ever seen in my entire life. No, I adore this movie to death. I mean, I'm pretty sure we touched on all of it. Again, I do want to shout out the scenes underneath, so black, so inky, so like Night of the Hunter-esque. Like, it's the best shadowy noir look you've ever seen in your life. The scenes in the prison cell too, like the gray looks so, it doesn't feel like a black and white film. It looks like a monotone gray film. And it looks so wonderful. Like, despite that, there's all this like careful shots of like all the characters' heads and faces together that look like a proto high and low shot. Like, it's every single aspect is just masterfully constructed in a way that very often doesn't really call attention to itself, just because of how process driven it is. You're just thinking the whole time, like, man, they're really digging the shit out of this concrete. And then at the end, you get kicked in the head by like, oh, this had this secret, raw, almost spiritual undercurrent to it, and it just saved it for the last moment. No, I mean, it's basically everything.
This guy doesn't have friends. That's the message of the movie ultimately.
Yeah, no.
But there's a raw purity of harsh labor to get you to that point. It's amazing. I don't think I've seen anything else like it, honestly, in that way.
Yeah, no, it's you gotta watch this. Like, everyone listening to this now, you gotta fucking see this. This is an incredible movie.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to mention too was just how they use sound in that final 5 minutes is incredible, because all the prisoners, like, you can't see them, they're not really like, you can't see the actual reactions, but they're all like making an insane amount of noise and like beating on their cells and all of that. And then as soon as he closes the door to the solitary confinement, everything kind of goes silent, and you just see the hallway get emptier and emptier until it's just 2 guards, and it's just like, the adventure's over, the friendship's over, the relationship you just saw develop is over, and that's it. They're back to square one essentially. So yeah, it is really, really good, amazing movie.
Yeah. I also have to wonder too a little bit of, I'm going to read some more about Jacques Becker, but I'm curious about the idea that it's the very polite, wealthy guy who is the guy who does everyone in this, when just knowing the background that he came from. Like, this is a guy who, went sports car driving with Jean Renoir as like a 20-year-old or something, like, it's like, I was curious if that was, he felt ostracized in prison by being next to like more working class guys or something. I have to, either way, the end result of all of this is I'm going to go down the Jacques Becker rabbit hole. And I think everyone else should too, starting with The Hole. Go check it out, as Spencer said. But that is, I think, going to wrap it up for this week's episode. That was The Wages of Fear from 1953 and The Hole from 1960. What great titles, too. I forgot to mention. The Wages of Fear, such a great title. And also The Hole, they all have like nice little double entendres going on existentially and with also just literally in the Wages of Fears. I didn't realize until I watched it actually that it's literally about like the working wages. Like, it's not like like the betting wages or but anyway. Spencer, this is the part of the show where we have people do their plugs. If you got anything going on, what's going on in those good old-fashioned values world?
So I got 2 podcasts for you to check out. The first one that you might have heard or listened to, I occasionally see it pop up in the Sleazoids Discord sometimes, is Get Cynical. This is one I do with fellow Sleazoids guest and Twitter person, Esther Rosenfield. We really kind of comb through and dig up internet detritus that's been forgotten. We have done a season-long retrospectives on the careers of forgotten YouTubers, Max Landis, Doug Walker, John Green, and we are about to start one on the rise and fall of Cracked.com. So that one's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, no, we have a lot of fun. I also have a comedy podcast called Those Good Old-Fashioned Values, the show that started out as a Family Guy review podcast, but then we all had a psychotic break and decided we didn't want to do that anymore. So now it is a comedy podcast / variety show where we alternate. We sometimes review movies, like we had Josh on to talk about Cop. Sometimes we force our friends to read fan fiction with us, which is a lot of fun. Sometimes we go for more high concept episodes. We had a really fun episode with Alex Nichols, Lowen Ofchin, where we made a fake true crime podcast episode. That was a lot of fun to put together. And yeah, if you are into comedy at all, and if you're into media analysis that's a lot less smart than this, like imagine like 3 people who all recently sustained a head injury trying to talk about a movie and getting derailed. That's going to be your jam. We reviewed Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And we spent about like 15 minutes just talking about how weird John Goodman looks now that he's skinny. So please, go check those out.
Content. That's awesome.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Go check both of them out for sure. For our listeners, we are going to be back in 1 week's time where, as Jamie already kind of mentioned, and we had set up actually as the episode we intended to do before this episode at one point, but due to some scheduling things, we had to make it the episode after. We're going to be doing an episode good news for anyone who liked The Hole when you eventually watched The Hole. We're going to be talking about like basically the exact intersection of the 2 things that it's doing. We are going to be doing a double feature of the minimalist procedural black and white 50s French part with Robert Bresson's A Man Escaped, where we are finally going to be talking about that film and doing more of the, sort of the more spiritual, more abstract version of a similar sort of prison escape situation. And then we're going to be seeing that the more gritty procedural style here translated into a American 70s context where we are going to be talking about Clint Eastwood and longtime collaborator Don Siegel doing Escape from Alcatraz, which actually was a watch that Jamie and I did together. And when we watched that, we were both kind of like, man, we got to pair that with A Man Escaped at some point. So Spencer just kind of set us up for that episode. And we were like, either way, the week before or after his episode, we're definitely doing this. So yeah, next week, I'm realizing that I love prison movies or prison escape movies. I'm not, I'm just going to, Jamie and I are going to have to go to jail for something. We'll figure that out later. But yeah, next week, A Man Escaped and a Escape from Alcatraz over on the Patreon. And then in 2 weeks' time, I'm still not sure actually what we're doing yet. We're still trying to lock it down. But I
should just do another prisoner escape movie so we can become masters.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that too. We'll just a whole month of prison escape movies. We'll see. I have been looking at the old TIFF lineups because I know that TIFF is about to start in 2 weeks, and I was thinking maybe we could do something from like the midnight program from like the 90s or something like that.
Yeah.
We'll see. 2 weeks from now, we're going to do a good episode on the main feed, but I'm not sure what it is yet. So stay tuned. That being said, that wraps it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.